Hey everyone, welcome to today's crash course on strengthen and weaken. A lot of theory lined up today and a lot of solving of pretty high quality questions. By the end of today, you will be much more confident about everything related to these two question types. So I look forward. Meanwhile, those of you who are here, please let me know you're here. Put in a hi there. That way, I know that the audio and the video is coming through. Meanwhile, let me share my screen. You should be able to see this momentarily. So tell me, guys, are you able to see my screen? And are you able to hear me well? Hello. Hi, that's awesome to see. Jaival Khan, I could be pronouncing your name wrong. My apologies for that. Tanvi, Akhilesh, Deepen, Rohan. Good to see all of you. So let's kind of start today's what I like to call crash course on strength and weaken, because I really intended this to be, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, whatever it takes. You will have a much better idea about these two topics by the end of this time, right? So just bear with me. There will be a little bit of theory. So let's get right to it. My objective today is to really help you get better at these two topics. Um, this session will be a little more theoretical than I originally anticipated. So I'm going to cover a lot of small nuances and ideas that I want you to, keep in mind. I'm sure it will help you sometime, right? And of course, as always, some patterns, some traps, but a lot of solving of questions today. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that. Now, I'm going to jump straight into it. This we already know, but because most of the strengthened questions are argument based questions, we have to again just kind of revise what an argument is, right? At its core, what is an argument? An argument is where somebody makes a claim and then they justify it using some means. That's the essence of an argument. Now that, for those of you who attended my boldface session last week, now that boldface is done, we also know there are these other things, counter premise, for example. But at its core, every argument will have a main conclusion, which is the central point the author of the argument wants to convince you of, and some reasoning to justify it. So that support or justification for that conclusion, which we like to call the premise. So keep this in mind. This is just recap notes. Over the last two sessions, I have been covering these ideas. So, but still, the main conclusion is that central idea which the author is trying to convince you of. What are premises we've covered? And here is something that I actually want you to pay attention to. On the GMAT, at least with regard to questions like assumption, evaluate, strengthen, and weaken, the kind of arguments that we have, they are not perfect arguments. They are arguments which have some kind of a flaw, some kind of an issue. And it's actually easy to understand why that is. Imagine that I gave you a strengthened question where the argument has no flaws, no issues whatsoever. An argument that is so perfect, it doesn't need to be strengthened. Think about the other side. If the argument is so perfect, whatever you do, you would not be able to weaken it. There's no flaw. How can you weaken it? So, in essence, when you're dealing with these questions on the GMAT, these question types on the GMAT, those are all arguments which have some kind of a flaw somewhere. Okay, just so that that aspect is clear. Now, let's go into real life thinking. Put yourself in a boardroom. So, imagine you work for a company, there's a boardroom, you're sitting in one of these meetings. If you want, you can put this round table, and this is you. And now there is a COO of the company who is presenting his or her argument. Take a look at what this argument is. Prince deserves a good salary hike this year. And why does the CEO say that? Because Prince met his monthly sales targets consistently for the last year. Right? So clearly, this is an argument. This is the main conclusion, and this is the supporting justification for the main conclusion. I hope you guys are following so far. Bear with me. We're going to build all the necessary concepts so that everything strength and weaken is clear. Right? Now, as of now, you're sitting at this table. All you heard is the COO's argument. Great. Now let's introduce another entity, right? This is the VP of sales. And this guy comes in and says, yeah, you're right. In fact, out of our 30% sales team, Prince was the only one who was able to consistently meet the monthly targets in that last year. Now, take a second to think about, put yourself right here on that table. the COO made a certain point, and now the VP of sales came in and said this. Now think about how that makes you feel. And I'm using the word feel. What does it make you believe as far as the CEO's argument is concerned? Does it make you believe a little bit more, at least a little bit more, in this idea that yes, Prince deserves a good salary hike this year? After all, he's the only one in a team of 30 who was able to do that, right? Would you agree with me? Just quick show of hands, yes, if the idea is clear. And what I'm trying to do is build the real life picture of what strengthen and weaken is, right? It strengthens the CEO argument. It's an additional premise that strengthens conclusion. It's like adding evidence. Yes, yes, and yes. All of this is true, right? So I hope you guys can see this. In a real life, if you are sitting in this meeting, you would definitely consider that the VP has strengthened the COO's argument. Now, let's take it the other way. Imagine, again, you are at this table. CEO has made his point, VP sales has made her point. Now comes in the CEO of the company. And she says, yeah, that is true. However, please note that we actually gave Prince comparatively easier targets. So compared to the rest of the people, he got easier targets. And there's a reason for that, because he's recent hire. We wanted to ease him into this entire process of sales, all that. Now, consider the CEO's statement and think about how that makes you feel about the idea that Prince deserves a good hike in salary this year. Does it make you at least doubt? I'm not saying it confirms, but does it make you at least feel some sense of doubt as to whether Prince really deserves a salary hike this year? Think about it. He got easier targets. That's why he was able to meet all his monthly sales. Does he really deserve a good hike? At least your mind should ask that question, right? If the CEO presented this statement on the table, you would at least wonder if that guy deserves a hike, right? It adds a level of doubt to the CEO statements, exactly, to the CEO's argument. This, in essence, is what strengthen and weaken really is, right? And for future reference, I want you to think about a strengthen weaken question this way. Put yourself in a boardroom, imagine the author is there and there are others, and then there's you. Think about every answer choice as a statement one of those others is making. How does it make you feel sitting there on that table about the author's argument? That's the correct framing for strengthen and weaken. Sometimes we get so buried in the technicalities of critical reasoning that we forget that this is all meant to be real life, common sense, logical thinking, right? And we'll come back to that, and I'll keep harping on this real life commonsensical thinking aspect as we do more questions. But I hope this fundamental is clear, right? Good. So now let's kind of zone in and understand what strengtheners and weakeners are, and we'll kind of formalize it through some definitions. Okay. So what exactly is a strengthener? It's a new idea that makes us being whoever is reading this argument, whoever is sitting at that table, it makes us believe a little more in that argument. Similarly, a weakener goes the other way. It's a new idea that makes us kind of believe less. It casts a little bit of doubt. It makes me wonder whether this is a good argument, right? Now, commonsensical logic is what is required, and I will give you examples of that, right? Now, you could argue that there could be some other reason why, despite Prince being the only one who was able to consistently meet the target, he doesn't deserve a good salary hike. All that is true. But given just this information, given the CEO's argument and given the statement, you are there at the table, just given these two pieces of information, what feels right? It's reasonably logical to think that somebody who is meeting those targets when nobody else was able to should be deserving a hike, right? Should be deserving a good hike, because clearly that guy has performed. That's what I call reasonable common sense logic. Reasonable to say that at some level. Similarly, look at it the other way, right? End of the day, this shows that his achievement may not reflect strong performance, but it's reasonably logical to say that if somebody has achieved targets, but those targets were really, the bar was very low, it was set very low, then you can ask that question, do they really deserve a good hike? Now, what this brings me to is actually one of the fundamental reasons a lot of us make mistakes in strengthen and weaken questions. Now, a lot of the times, we see the correct answer choice. That could be an answer choice like D, for example. We see this correct choice, it feels like a strengthener, and then we reject it on the grounds that, hey, even if this is true, the conclusion might not be valid. I could still break the conclusion. That is suicide as far as this particular topic is concerned, right? Because a strengthener only has to make you believe a little bit more. It has to tangibly make you believe more in the argument, in the conclusion. It does not have to prove the conclusion, right? Now, for example, here's a scenario. We've understood what the CEO said, and we have understood the statement that was made by the VP of sales. Now, imagine this is a strengthened question and this is an answer choice. Let's say this is answer choice C, and you're trying to evaluate this. Now, it looks good, but if you ask the question, hey, maybe it's true that out of the 30% sales team, Prince was the only one who consistently met the target. Still, what if Prince is not deserving of a good hike? Maybe because he is actively been doing some unethical practices. He's been poaching his teammates. He's poaching his teammates' leads, so on and so forth. He's doing a lot of mis-selling, false selling, God knows, right? The point is, it should not matter. While the above scenario, which I'm talking about, unethical sales or poaching, it's definitely possible just based on the information that you have with you, which is the CEO's argument and then the statement. You could not assume this, right? How can you assume just out of thin air that Prince has been doing unethical sales? And as long as you can't assume that, you can't bring this into consideration, and you cannot say that this particular choice is not a strengthener. Now, it sounds very easy and perhaps silly when I just present you this, but I know for a fact, having interacted with a good number of students, some of you, that these are the kind of mistakes that we all make, right? And that's why we're kind of harping on it and discussing it, taking my own time with this. But any questions so far? Are these ideas coming through? Just let me know. I'll occasionally be looking at the comments just to see, if I'll try my best to answer all the questions, right? So in strengthen leaves any doubt, and that makes the option at face value. Wait a second, what is it? So the point is, a strengthener does not have to prove it. Despite the strengthener being true, you could arrive at some extreme scenario where the conclusion may not hold true at all. But that's okay. Under reasonable common sense, you would expect the conclusion to be a little more solid given the premises, thanks to that statement, right? And we'll get into this. We'll get into more of this, right? So just based on the CEO and the VP statements here, this is the only information we have. End of the day, the VP statement, the choice that we're evaluating, it does make us believe more, given the reasonably logical expectation that if somebody is able to meet targets when nobody else is able to, he's done a good job, right? Presumably deserving of a good hike. In the absence of any other evidence that should strengthen this idea, the core idea. Now, likewise with weekend, you could say that what if Prince is still deserving, despite what the CEO says, despite the fact that he got easier targets to work with? What if he's still deserving a good salary hike? Because perhaps, maybe in the history of the company, even with such easy targets, nobody has ever met those targets. Sounds extreme, but things happen. It's sales. Anything happens. Again, while the scenario is possible, just based on the statements that we have, just based on the information that we have, you could not just assume this. You cannot assume this out of thin air. The reasonably logical expectation here is his targets were way easier compared to the rest. At least there's a semblance of doubt. Does this guy really deserve a good salary hike? Right? I hope the fundamental idea here is clear. Now let's move on. So just to summarize, a strengthener does not have to prove your argument. It just has to make you believe a little bit more. Similarly, a weakener does not have to break your argument. It does not have to disprove your conclusion. It just has to cast a certain level of doubt. And we're going to do some nice, interesting questions today where you'll find that it's very indirect. It will feel like, okay, is this really the correct answer? Because the logic is very indirect. It doesn't feel like it's disproving. The conclusion could still be true despite all of that, but it is casting doubt. So you'll see all of that. So one of the core ideas here, and this is actually one of the reasons we go wrong with a lot of these question types, including evaluate, which would be the next session coming up. be very careful of assuming something that's not logical to assume. So without any information, how can I assume that Prince has been poaching his teammates' leads and he's been doing sales unethically? We could not assume that. So just think about that. I hope this helps. Right. So just to again remind you, the reason I like to have this boardroom view when I'm dealing with strength and weakness, it keeps that much needed real life common sense thinking, common sense logical reasoning alive. Right. It makes you think that way rather than just get buried in some text, some CR question. You're treating it very, very formally, too formally, in fact. Right. So I hope this helps. Now, a little bit of those definitions and those nuances. So, as I defined this earlier, a strengthener is a new idea that makes us believe a bit more in the argument. Notice also that I'm using the word argument here, but sometimes you see these plan-based questions. It may be believe more in the idea that the plan will succeed. There may not be a defined main conclusion, but yeah, we'll come to that when we get there. But in essence, this is right. So it's a new idea that makes us believe more. Now, right, what does it say? What do I mean when I say it makes us believe a little more in the argument? Essentially, it means that the statement, it kind of makes us believe a little bit more that, hey, based on these premises, this conclusion is somewhat logical to make. That's the idea. If it makes me believe that, yeah, this is a somewhat logical conclusion to make based on the given premises, that's essentially what it means. Remember, it does not have to prove the argument. We have discussed this. Now, what do I mean when I say new idea? Right? The facts that are anything that's absolutely fact established as true from the passage, from the argument, it doesn't need strengthening. We're not looking to strengthen that at all, right? It cannot be something that's already known and confirmed as true from the premises. It has to be something else, right? So what that means from a answer choice analysis perspective is sometimes we might see a statement that is not really strengthening the argument itself. It's merely adding support to something which we already know and consider to be true. Something that's already believed to be true, it's a factual statement in the argument. And if there's a statement which kind of adds support to that, makes you believe that a little bit more, that's typically useless as a strengthened question, right? So I hope this idea is clear. And the vice versa also, let's discuss that. It's a double decker session. We are doing weakener and strengthener today, right? So it's a new idea that makes us believe a little less in the argument. And what do I mean? It makes me believe a little less in the argument. Based on the premise, the author is arriving at a conclusion. A weakener will make me doubt whether this conclusion can be drawn based on those premises. That's what it means. So you would see these words sometimes in those questions. It weakens the force of the reasoning. That's essentially the same thing, right? It does not have to disprove or break. Now, here's a small interesting point. We are not allowed to weaken anything that's a pure factual premise. For example, the premise that was used in the CEO's argument is this one, that Prince did not meet his monthly sales targets. That is not meant to be challenged. You would not be challenging that. You would not see that as a choice. If you see that as a choice, run away. That's not a valid idea. That's not a valid weakener. But if in an argument the author has used some premises to arrive at an intermediate conclusion which eventually supports your main conclusion, and you're trying to weaken this argument overall, which means you're trying to weaken this, the intermediate conclusion is not a stated fact. It's something the author derives as part of his or her reasoning. So that is actually challengeable. That's questionable. You could challenge that. So a factual, pure fact premise, you can never attack it. You can never challenge it. However, an intermediate conclusion is, again, it's reasoning that has been used by the author, and reasoning can be challenged, right? So I just wanted to keep these ideas in mind. So I'm just putting all those ideas in there. Okay, let's move. So we're going to do a warm-up question. Meanwhile, I will take a look at the comments. Notice I'm not asking you to find the strengthener or weakener. I'm asking you to find the assumption. So let's discuss. Let me know what the answer is. From this, we'll work our way to assumption, to strengthen and weaken. All right, good. I'm happy to see the answers coming through, and I'm happy to see nobody's confused about this. I did assumption to, a couple of sessions ago. I'd be surprised if any of you who attended that would be going wrong here. Thankfully, I don't see any of you faltering here. So, to answer a couple of questions that came in, MJ thinks, suppose if in a strengthened question an answer choice is something without which the argument is absolutely broken, right? So essentially an assumption, right? I'm going to answer the question. It's coming right up, but short answer: every assumption by default is a strengthener. An assumption is a strengthener. Okay. That answers that question. Jaival, can we challenge the logic that is used to arrive? We cannot challenge the premise, but we could challenge the reasoning, right? Any factual premise, no. But the author's reasoning used to justification to arrive at, that's how all your weekend questions work, right? In any, even with the main conclusion, we are challenging the reasoning at some level. So yeah, the logic can be challenged. Pratyaksh, so the rephrased version of a premise should be avoided in option choice. Yes. Typically, keep an open mind, but typically, yes. Because that's not what strengtheners are meant to be. They're supposed to strengthen that connection between the premise and the conclusion. It's supposed to strengthen the idea that based on the premise, this conclusion is much more believable. Right? That's what it's trying to do. So, good. So, hopefully, we are through. Let's continue. So none of you struggled with this. This is of course the assumption, but the point that I was trying to come to is that a lot of times, and we discussed this in my assumptions webinar as well, it's quite often easy to identify the assumption if you're able to do a critical analysis of the argument. And when I say critical, if of course it's called critical reasoning, end of the day, we are meant to be doing critical analysis of arguments, and that's what it's being tested. But what I mean is, even before going to the choices, if you're able to take a few seconds, or as you read the argument, you're able to figure out, okay, this is a problem with the argument. Usually, you will find assumptions there. Always you will find assumptions there, and usually that exercise will help you, right? So if I think about this particular argument, and humans are pretty good at finding flaws, whether it's in people or in arguments. So I'm sure a lot of you have this ability, and the rest of you, with practice, it should come in. But yeah, being able to fault find is a superpower in CR. But yeah, coming back to this. So we have this logic issue or a gap. What is the issue here? The conclusion is the campaign was successful in boosting sales. The author is arriving at this conclusion based on one thing. In the same month that the campaign was run, the sales increased. So that we had these two events happening together, but the author is assuming that one caused the other, right? So you have to ask the question when I'm trying to find the bullet hole in this argument. How can I be sure that this campaign had anything to do with the observed 10% increase in sales? Maybe the real reason for sales was something else altogether, right? As long as you can think of this logical gap, a lot of time it's not just easy to arrive at the assumptions. I gave you this, but all of this would be valid assumptions. The overall broad spectrum idea would be this: say the observed sales increase, it was not entirely due to some other factor, right? Because if it's entirely due to some other reason, then the argument breaks. Now my point is, being able to arrive at these logical gaps is also a superpower with regard to strengthen and weaken. These are associated question types, and you'll kind of see the same thing when I touch upon evaluate, right? Now, the logic gap or the issue with the argument that I'm sure all of you have able to realize this. What if the real reason for the increased sales was some other reason entirely? Now, from this, how do I navigate to a strengthen or a weaken question? Very simple. Ask the question. As far as this argument goes, I know what the logic gap is. What will help me believe more? What kind of answer choice will help me believe more in the argument? What kind of answer choice will help me believe a little less or make me doubt the argument? And you will invariably come up with something like this. Any statement that actually kind of suggests or builds the case that the actual reason for the observed sale increase was something else, that would weaken. Similarly, any statement that suggests that the given reason, which is the marketing campaign, is the reason for the increased sales, that of course would work as well. And you also have something like this: any reason, a statement that kind of removes a possible alternate reason. So you might think that some marketing campaign Y might have caused the observed sale increase Y. Now a statement which says that no, it was definitely not Y. In other words, you're removing that alternate possible scenario, that would also be a strengthener, right? So I hope you see that connection between finding the logical issue, finding the logic issue in an argument, and thinking about strengtheners and weakeners, because sometimes this really helps. I hope you guys see this. Now, I'm going to give you another exercise while you marinate on these thoughts. Now, there are 5 choices. Notice this is not one of the usual questions. Here, you have to make a commentary on each and every statement. So, for example, statement A could be a strengthener, statement B could be a weakener, statement C could be neither. Right? So, let me know what each of these statements are. The question is the same, the argument is the same. Your job is to figure out each of these statements. Is it a strengthener, is it a weaken, or is it neither? None of the above. None of those two. Hey, Shwan, good to see you. Yeah, Jaival, even the intermediate conclusion is it's coming from the reasoning. It's definitely challengeable. I hope that helps. Good to see answers coming in. I'm going to wait for another 30 seconds for any of you who's still trying this. So now the initially started with everybody telling me S S S W W. Now towards the end, I'm seeing a lot of N N N, some S S S N W as well. So some of this all of us are clear with. Uh, SSWNW. Okay, let's discuss all of this, right? And through this exercise, hopefully, we'll get a good feel for what's what would be a strengthener, what would be a weakener, and how to process the answer choices. I think that there's a lot of muscle there, right? Now, let's look at the first statement again. Remember, what is the conclusion that we are trying to strengthen or weaken, or at least evaluate in this case? The campaign was successful in boosting sales. How does the author justify this conclusion? How does the author arrive at this? Hey, in the same month, we ran the campaign, the campaign X was run, and in the same month, we also saw this 10% increase in sales, right? Based on that, the author is jumping to the conclusion that the campaign was successful in boosting sales. Argument is clear. Now let's look at statement A. By the way, the answers are here. The first is just all of you who told me SSSWW, you were right. So there are a couple of neithers there. I hope I can clear that with this discussion. Right. The first one, I already covered this just a while ago. There's a good doubt on that. Remember, guys, every assumption by default is a strengthener, because an assumption is essentially plugging a logical gap. And by plugging a logical gap, it makes my argument a lot more believable. Therefore, remember, every assumption by default is a strengthener. Vice versa is not necessarily true. A strengthener need not be an assumption. In fact, most of the times they aren't. Right? So the first one is a strengthener. None of you struggled with this. Let's look at the second statement. That's interesting. Customer surveys indicated that 65% of new buyers that month cited campaign X as their reason for purchasing. If you really think about it, it's telling you that, hey, a good majority of the new buyers, I'm talking about what the sentence is trying to tell you. Explicitly, it says 65% of new members, new buyers. So we're talking about new buyers, people who have got sales, bought more things suddenly. They cited campaign X as the reason. But what is it trying to tell you? Majority of the new buyers actually came in thanks to campaign X. So clearly, there's a good amount of sales coming in thanks to campaign X. It seems logical to give credit to campaign X, given this. Do you guys agree with me? Those who thought that this didn't work? If it was like 10%, perhaps you wouldn't think that way. I don't know. But reasonably clear majority of people are telling you that they came in and they bought stuff, new buyers, they bought stuff thanks to campaign X. It should make you believe that this campaign did something to boost sales, right? Quick show of hands for anyone who struggled with this, let me know. Uh, let's look at, this is a strengthener, this is also a strengthener. Now let's look at choice C. The company paused all other marketing activities during the month campaign X was running. You know, if this was not true, if the company had all other marketing activities actively running, you would still have some suspicion, right? You would wonder maybe it's these other campaigns that are actually that actually caused the increase in sales. Maybe it's those other campaigns, right? What choice C does is successfully eliminate this possibility that the observed increase in sales was because of some other campaign. And by doing that, it kind of helps you believe more in the given idea. So for instance, the argument claims, the author claims that campaign X is to be given credit for the increased sales. Now, if you knew that there were other campaigns like Y or Z which could have caused this increase in sales, that's a problem. So what does choice C do? It eliminates the possibility that there are these other campaigns which could have caused that increase in sales. Right? Therefore, by guarding against a potential weakener, you call this a strengthener. So this is actually one of the types of strengtheners that I want you to be aware of. And I actually write it down somewhere else later. One of the classic styles of strengthening an argument is to kind of guard against something that would otherwise weaken. So this fits that category. So the first three are all strengtheners. I hope you guys see that. Now let's look at choice D. Choice D is actually bringing in one alternate reason. You want to prove that it was the campaign that should be credited with the boost of sales. The campaign was successful. Choice D is essentially saying, hey, maybe it's this other reason. What is that other reason? There's a major competitor who became bankrupt at the beginning of the month, driving their customers to seek alternatives. Notice it doesn't tell you with any level of certainty that these customers came to your company, right? But remember, if some in a boardroom, if somebody presented this choice D to you, so if somebody presented the argument that the campaign was successful in boosting sales, and then somebody made the statement to you, see, there is this company which has declared bankruptcy, it drove all their customers to seek alternatives. It should at least make you doubt that perhaps these guys came to your company. Then it's not really because of the campaign. It might really be just that the other company went bankrupt. Major competitor went bankrupt. So I hope this kind of makes it clear. So that for that reason, choice D would qualify as a weakener in my book. Now, choice E is also a weakener, right? Now, here is another aspect. Maybe we're talking about December. Just to give you an example, maybe the month we're talking about is December. It's holiday season. You have Christmas, you have New Year. Maybe every year around this time, every year, the month of December, there's a peak in sales. And maybe for all you know, this 10% increase that you saw, it happens every December from the particular November. It has nothing to do with the fact that you ran this campaign X. It had everything to do with the seasonality, right? There's a seasonal demand thanks to the holiday season, let's say. And that's what choice E does. Yet again, it provides a different alternate reason for what could actually explain the boost in sales. So D and E are what we call as weakeners. So So I hope these ideas are kind of clear. D is giving an alternate. I missed the all other. Okay. Don't worry. We are just getting started. As you keep building muscle, you should definitely do a lot better. So I see all those sad emojis, and I'm reacting to that. Yeah, D is giving an alternate exactly. C is doing what A is doing. Yeah, A is the overall archetype of those answer choices. C is a specific example. You're absolutely right, Rohan. Yeah. If the word had only, yeah, then it might make you not believe it. 65% may not maybe peanuts in this industry, right? But still, it's a somewhat significant. So customer surveys indicated that only 65% of new buyers that month cite. The point is, even if it's only 65, that's still it still makes me believe that the campaign was at least somewhat successful. So that word may not make a difference in this case, but typically the word only changes everything. It's a very important word, but interesting doubt, right? Excellent question, Soumya. In option D, even without this driving their customers to seek alternatives, actually it might work, right? It doesn't go as far as tell you that the customers had to go elsewhere, but at some level you could infer that it's kind of logical to assume that if the company went, it's logical to reason out and consider that if the company went bankrupt, then they would not be able to service their customers. Those customers might be looking for alternatives. So it could work even without this. I've made it a little more crisp and clear cut, but in an actual GMAT question, you might have this exact statement without the driving. It could still work. Remember, there is also the element of process of elimination. By any chance, if there's a better choice, you could take it. But yes, it does have a weakening impact on the argument. That's an excellent question, right? Yeah, it's a great exercise. I hope so. I hope you guys are learning something from this. And I'm taking my time. It's okay. Right. So I see a lot of what ifs, right? It's interesting. What if option E says sales typically uh, increase by less than 10%? Oh, fantastic. There are actually question types that test you on similar things. If sales typically increase by only 2%, but now you saw a 10% increase, it would actually be a strengthener. Let's say typically in this month, you see an increase of only 2%, but now suddenly you're seeing 10%. It might make you think that perhaps it's really the campaign. So that actually could work as a strengthener. So I'm happy to see these questions because if you twist the language a little bit, if you change some things here or there, an answer which looks like a weakener, the way I've put it here, it's a weakener, but it can be converted into a strengthener. In fact, there are actually a couple of questions which kind of test you on a similar idea. But yeah, I think we are diverging here. Let me, yeah. Hmm. Okay, so let's move. It's already a weakener. Yeah, that's fine. So just some of the concepts that we discussed here. Every assumption by default a strengthener. The opposite is not necessarily true. We saw one example of this. A statement that guards against a weakener, in effect, builds the case for the argument. You would consider this as a strengthener. And I'll actually show you conceptually why this works, right? Think about your strengthener as a missing premise or an additional premise, if nothing else. A strengthener is essentially a premise statement that you could straight away lift from the answer choices and place in the argument, and the argument would still make sense. That essentially is what a strengthener is. A strengthener is something that makes you believe more. What is a premise? It also helps you build the case for the argument. So think of strengthener as a premise statement, and once you see it that way, and once you take in this choice C, which we called defending against an weakener. So remember, choice C was defending against a potential weakener. The potential weakener is what if there are these other marketing activities that could have contributed, right? Choice C was guarding against those weakeners. Now you see, am I able to place choice C in the argument? Does the argument still make sense? Take a second, read that, and let me know if the argument feels sensible. That's exactly what a strengthener is. By the way, this is another way of trying to gauge if you're dealing with a real strengthener. Put it in the argument in a logical way and see if it makes sense. Jaival, I think you're question is necessary and sufficient, are they all strength? Any assumption is a strengthener, yeah. It makes you believe more. It plugs a gap somewhere. I don't think I would even differentiate on those. But everyone, does this make sense? When I put choice C and put it as a premise, does the argument seem to make sense? All right. Thank you for that. Yes, yes, yes. Thank God. I was waiting for the reply. I don't know. I know it's for a lot of us it's late in the night, so if you guys fall asleep, please don't. Yeah. Hopefully not. Hopefully don't go sleep before the session is done. Right. So the point is, therefore, I introduced you to a specific. I introduced you to a specific type of weakener, which is strengthener, which is defense against a weakener. Okay. And why that makes sense is this understanding that a strengthener is a premise. You could just put it in and you'll see it works. Okay, good. I'm going to give you one more exercise with the same argument just to hammer some points home. Same exercise. A, B, C, D, strengthener, weakener, neither. S, W, N. Let me know. The first answer is here. I'm going to wait for a few more seconds. Maybe C can strengthen, not convinced. Okay. Okay. Actually, that's a very interesting point, and that's one of the main reasons I have this question. Yeah. A lot of SNNW, some SNSW as well in the mix. Okay. Yeah, there's an SNWN as well. Okay. It's mostly SNNW and some variations of that. SNNW still if it's on test. I mean, assume you're on test. Come on. Right. Assume you're on test. Of course, nobody's judging you here. It's a completely low risk environment. But, for the purpose of answering the question, assume it's the GMAT. Everything here is GMAT like. I haven't twisted anything here. Okay. All right. So the answer would be this is a strengthener. This would be neither because it's kind of irrelevant. Now, statement C was an intentionally crafted, there's a specific idea behind that. It's what I like to call unclear impact. In simple words, based on what you assume, it could go either way, right? And I've shown kind of that's what I wanted to show. As far as the answer is concerned, it should be neither. It's neither a strengthener nor a weakener because you have to assume a lot of things to make it work, and somebody else could assume something else and make the opposite work. So SNNW is the right answer. So those of you who are getting this right, I think your fundas are all clear. But those of you who are currently struggling a bit, I hope this discussion helps you out. Right? That's the idea. So let's get right into it. The first one, I think most of us are clear this is a strengthener. In another location, in fact, I'm actually surprised so many of you did not fall for this. Didn't any of you think that, hey, this is talking about what happens in some other location and therefore it's irrelevant? Because I do see a lot of students make this mistake when they are solving OG questions. A choice which brings in some other entity and is talking about what happens in some other location. Sometimes you just say, hey, it's happening in some other place, it's irrelevant, and you just reject it outright. I know a lot of you do that. So that's one of the reasons this is here. But I'm happy to see here, at least the way I've written it, it's so clear to you that it works. But we'll discuss that. So why does choice A work as a strengthener? in another location where the same campaign was implemented, where this campaign was not implemented, but everything else remained the same. So same kind of location, probably same kind of customers, same type of sales conversion typically seen. Imagine all factors being the same. The only difference, it's like a control group. The only difference is in one place campaign X was implemented, in another case campaign was not implemented, right? Campaign X was not implemented. And where it was implemented, you actually saw sales. Where it was not implemented, sales remained unchanged. That should make you tangibly believe that, hey, maybe my campaign X is doing something great here, right? I believe all of you who chose strength S for this, that was the idea. I'm happy to see none of you struggled with this. Let's look at choice B, which is one of the easiest types of questions, answer choices you'll see. And you see this a lot. Remember, a lot of times, in fact, it's a design feature of the test that typically 2 to 3 choices can be rejected easily. This is one of the usual templates of those easy to reject choices. You know that this argument has nothing to do with cost. Nobody cares about the cost of the campaign as far as this particular conclusion, this particular argument is concerned. So this is clearly not a strengthener. It's also not a weakener. It's completely irrelevant. Right? Right? Hold on. This choice C is somewhat interesting because we're introducing a certain level of difficulty here. Now, website traffic, I cannot with certainty say is not connected to sales. If it's an online company, if it is an online company, that website traffic might convert to sales, right? So, but how do I know all of that? I don't know. The company's website traffic increased by 30% during the month campaign X was running. I would have to assume that, yeah, traffic leads, website traffic actually converts into sales. People actually look at the website and from there they get converted, they become customers. I would have to assume that. I don't know that. Is it a completely offline business which has a website just for namesake? I don't know. So I'd have to assume something here. I also have to assume that if this company's website increased by 30%, that's okay, that's understood. But it was because of campaign X. All I know is in the same month, campaign X was also running, company's website traffic was also running. I would have to kind of assume without any basis, assume out of thin air that this traffic increase was actually because of campaign X. Because then you would call this a strengthener. Do you see the logic? If I assume that, campaign X is the cause for the website traffic increase, and then if I assume that website traffic increase has a direct connection to sales, then choice C would work. I'm essentially telling you that you have to give credit to campaign X for the sales. But notice I had to assume all these things. Do I know traffic is connected to sales? Yeah, perhaps, but there's a bit of an assumption. Here is a bigger assumption. I have to assume that the traffic increase was due to campaign X. How do I know that? I don't know anything about that. That's why this is unclear impact. And these kinds of choices are trickier. Why? Because in the heat of the moment, when we are not able to find any other answer choice, sometimes we will make these assumptions on our own and just assume that this works. Everybody with me on this? I hope what I said didn't go on top of your head. I hope you understood what I meant, right? So website traffic could lead to sales, but really there's no basis to saying that, right? These kinds of choices are often a little trickier because the test maker is playing on this aspect that perhaps you will assume something out of thin air which you cannot really assume, right? For me, this is a classic assumption. I cannot really say that with any certainty that the traffic increase was thanks to campaign X. I have no idea. That's me taking a leap. This is how we force fit and make incorrect choices correct. I'm sure some of you have definitely done this. I know because some of you come to me, right? All right. So that's why this statement is also a neither. This is a strengthener. This is a neither. This is a neither. The last one is a clear weakener. 3 other marketing campaigns were also running simultaneously during the same month, right? It again brings in this idea that perhaps you have to give, it's maybe not our campaign X, it's these other campaigns. Three other campaigns were running, man. Can you really say with certainty that, it is campaign X that did the job? Yeah, somewhat doubtful. The doubt is there. So SNNW is the answer to this. But how does it feel? I put you through a exercise, not entirely easy, right? Meanwhile, let me just go through the questions that you guys have put in. Uh, Two layered C, yeah. So you went for N, you got it right. Mhm. Deepen, that's exactly. I realize in C now that it leads to two paths. Yeah, based on what you assume, it could go either way. That's why I call this unclear or ambiguous impact. These are nasty choices, right? PTSD, I hope I've helped you with that. Get over that. Uh, hmm. Yeah. If all the factors are same, was not mentioned, would it still be a strengthener? I think you're talking about the previous question. Huh. Yeah, all the factors were the same, right? This one. It would still work, but it won't be that good a strengthener. So remember, as far as these questions concerned, there is a scale. You also have to, I mean scale, SCALE. You have to also look at process of elimination, see if by any chance there is a better, stronger strengthener, right? What I did was when I put all factors are the same, it makes it a lot more concrete. It's much more strong. Even if I take it out, it could work because it does bring in this idea that in another location, sales remained unchanged. You know, it's not as good a choice until you know that the comparison is apple to apple. It should be a similar location. Some things should be same, even if not all factors are same. Some factors should ideally be the same. So it could still work, but I wouldn't like it as a choice until I know that the comparison is apples to apples. The locations have to be similar, at least for the major part, right? I hope that helps. So there is a scale aspect to it. If you find a better choice, maybe. So what else? For D, can't it go both ways? Absolutely not. That's my point. You have to assume the strong enough marketing campaigns. Doesn't this make it unclear? Excellent question. The point is, again, that's why the scale is important. This correct meter of this, what GMAT looks at as strengthen and weaken is important. Put yourself in that boardroom. Imagine somebody tells you, firstly, the author told you in the month that we ran campaign X, we saw 10% increase in sales. Clearly, the campaign was successful. Now, imagine somebody says, but hold on, you know that in that same month, three other marketing campaigns were also running. Think about it that way. Hold on. In that exact same month, three other marketing campaigns were running. You know what happens when I say that? When you are just listening to the author and this other person makes statement D, it should make you a little doubtful. Like it introduces that possibility. You don't know for sure if those other marketing campaigns were any good, but it introduces the possibility in a very tangible way that perhaps it's not this campaign, it could be those other campaigns. That's the correct meter, right? I hope this helps. Jaival, you're remembering the actual question. Yeah. Related to choice A, right? I know. That's actually it. It's downtown traffic congestion. Some of you know it. So I hope this point about choice D is also clear. All other I didn't write all other business factors the same. All other factors could be customer profile, typical number of target customers. All of them are same, right? Doesn't matter. At least the way I've written it, it shouldn't matter. Harsha, that's the answer to your question. Can you explain why option D is a weakener? Think about it. The author makes the claim that the campaign was successful in boosting sales based on the fact that in the same month I had this campaign and I had this 10% increase in sales. Now, if I am given this statement that, hey, there were these other, you know what, it's not just this campaign, there were three other campaigns that were running in this month, doesn't it create an element of doubt in your head? At least a doubt. There's no confirmation that those three campaigns were great, but doesn't it create a doubt? Just the knowledge that there were three other marketing campaigns. Marketing campaigns are trying to get you sales, trying to get you customers. Just the knowledge that there are three other marketing campaigns running, doesn't it create an element of doubt in your head? Look back, think about that. It's good. This seems like a very hotly contested. It's good, but this is important because these are exactly the kind of questions that you'll see on the GMAT with regard to strength and weaken. And as we and I'm, after this, we're gonna do only OG questions. You're gonna see exactly this, right? So look back. Thanks. I think you got it right. So I think we are getting into a lot of tangents here. I do think we should move ahead, but let me see. Is there any other question that's there? Hmm. For C, if we add all other factors were the same, does it help or still doesn't? Does traffic doesn't? It still doesn't because I still don't know what is a connection between traffic and sales. I have to assume that. So I'd be wary of picking this as a choice. You know, till I tangibly have some idea about it. Yeah, traffic presumably leads to sales at some level, but I would still not know is it from this company. There's still a lot of ambiguity there, right? D would be a weaker, definitely not a strengthener. Yeah, these are the kind of weaknesses you will sometimes see on the exam. It's all classic tropes here. I haven't pulled anything unique here, right? So, for any of you who had this idea that choice A should not work because, hey, it's talking about some other location, how could it be a strengthener? Here is a more relatable example. And I'm assuming some of you are in this phase where you're preparing for the GMAT and all that. So, because you're here, imagine you're this person. I hope this is not you, but imagine you're this person who is currently stuck at 625 and aiming for a 705. If you're more ambitious, put 785. I don't care for that. And all test companies are trying to get you as their customers. All these test prep companies out there are trying to get you as their customers. And here are two testimonials that they give you, right? Maybe it's on their website, whatever it is. One of those testimonials says, hey, our student Diana, she improved from 685 to 705. Honestly, for you who's starting at 625, this is not a very inspiring story, right? This doesn't make you believe that for you, this company might work. But look at the other case. Hey, my student Aditi, the descriptive company says, right? My student Aditi improved from a 615, kind of close, apple to apple comparison, all the way to 705. We were able to get her from here to here. Now, if you are listening to this, you are reading this testimonial. This testimonial should make you feel a little more inclined towards this company. At this point in real life, when you are doing this analysis, you don't ask the question that, hey, Aditi is out of scope, it's a different entity, I'm not Aditi. You don't ask these questions in real life, but sometimes in the heat of the moment while solving questions we make these mistakes. So remember, don't blindly reject a choice just because it talks about a different entity. Sometimes those are correct answers. What should work, what makes it a correct answer if the entities being compared are comparable. Apple to apple comparison is okay, apple to orange doesn't work. So if you are at 625, a comparison with Diana doesn't work. It doesn't move the needle for you. It won't make you believe anything. But a comparison with Aditi, who's someone who's exactly like you, near that score, that should help, right? There are specific OG questions. I think Jaival has mentioned that downtown traffic and all that. Specific OG questions that test you exactly on this concept. So definitely, when you guys solve that OG question, if you get it right, say my name, right? Let's move on. So answer choice analysis. Remember, one of the things that you did here silently, in all of these answer choices, we never questioned the truth of any of these choices. We just assumed that these choices are true. We just said, yeah, these choices are true. Now let's see how they impact the argument. Does it make me believe more? Does it make me believe less? So remember, this is a design feature of strengthen and weaken questions. The choices are typically considered as true. Unlike an inference question. In an inference question, you're trying to figure out if the choice is true. In a strengthen/weaken question, you consider the given choice is true and then try to see how does it impact the argument. Does it make you believe more? Does it make you believe less? Is it completely irrelevant, etc.? Is this clear? Shall I move on? So what that means is the type of choices that you see based on the impact it has. Sometimes you see an option choice which is a strengthener, sometimes you see a weakener. A lot of times you'll see these completely irrelevant choices. By the way, not all irrelevant choices are easy to eliminate. Some of them are nasty. And sometimes you see this. I gave you one example. Based on what you assume, it could go either way. And a lot of us make the mistake of assuming things we should not. Right? I hope this conceptual foundation helps you a little bit. But yeah, to summarize what the start of the discussion was, being able to spot those logic gaps where possible. I'm not saying, in the exam scenario, I'll try to spot this. I'm not going to spend 50, 55 seconds on this. But if I'm able to spot something quickly, that usually helps a lot. Okay. Does that help before I go into the next phase? Now we're going to solve from this point on everything that you want to touch is OG or LSAT, nothing else. Right? So I hope I answered most of the questions out there. I think I did a good job in general. But if there's still something, let me know. If by any chance, by any accident, if there's some question here which I still miss, feel free to reach out to me. I will answer. Okay. Or at least I'll try to. But can I move on? Just give me a quick show of hands, guys. Yes, no. Are we ready? Because from this point, I'm going to make you solve full length questions. All of this was foundation building. I gave you, I hope, a reasonable idea about what strength and weaken is all about, some of the finer nuances that are there. Now we're going to take it up a notch with questions. Great. Nice to see that enthusiasm. Great. So let's get straight to it. Here's a question. Let me know what the answer is. Yeah, good to see answers coming in. All right. So most of you are done. Let's start discussing this. But while any of you still solving this, how did this question feel? And feel includes emotion also. Feel free. You know, you can say easy, medium, difficult, or you can say this was nasty. I don't care. Or you felt this is easy. That also is okay. So yes, yes, C, medium. Okay. So let's discuss this. So A and C almost, right? It's almost a similar split between A and C, slightly tilted towards a couple of B's and C's as well, B's and E's as well. So let's discuss. And now through this, let's also discuss how I typically solve strengthen and weaken questions. Maybe it works for you as well. First thing, I want you to observe the phrasing of the question. Now, this is a specific question stem, which is of course for this question, but it's kind of a representative example of what these questions look like. So there are two elements that I really want you to notice. I told you, right? As far as these questions are concerned, you typically consider the given choice as true and then figure out how does it impact your argument. So you'll always, not always, but 90% of the time, 99% of the time, let's say, you will see this phrasing if true, which is the author, the testmaker telling you that consider these choices as true. Don't treat it like an inference question. The second word I really want you to pay attention to is most. Now, some of you were giving me all this different scenarios, right? What if you put all the other factor here? What if you put an only there? Right? Some of that might make it less of a strengthener, might make it more of a strengthener, might make it less of a weakener. And that's important because there is a scale aspect to these questions. The question stem usually tells you which of the following most seriously strengthens, which of the following most weakens. You'll see this phrasing, which means there might be a choice that, it's a weak strengthener. It can work, but if you see a better choice, you should go for it. Right? So keep that in mind. So now let's talk about the process in general. You could take a look at the question stem before going to the stimulus, that means argument or plan. I personally am not a proponent of that. I prefer to read the stimulus first, free from any other bias. But that's a touch and go. Somehow, I've known people who always looked at the question stem and still did pretty well, right? But yeah, at the end of the day, when you hit the stimulus, read carefully, understand the best you can. Now, most of the cases you're dealing with an argument here. So identify the main conclusion, identify the justification used to arrive at the main conclusion. So from your reading of the argument, there are two things that your brain should kind of catch and try to arrive at this as soon as you can. What is the main conclusion being made and what is the justification for the main conclusion? The premises that support the main conclusion, right? Now, if it's not an argument type question, sometimes, for instance, you may not find a conclusion in the stimulus. Sometimes it might be in the question stem. Sometimes you'll be dealing with a plan. So there is a certain plan, and the entire passage slash argument is just describing various aspects of the plan. This is the plan. This is the objective of the plan, so on and so forth, right? In which case, make sure you kind of note down what is the plan, what is the goal. Be very clear about those things. Now, as with all arguments, if possible, I'm not saying it's always going to happen, but if you're practicing on time trying to build ability, don't directly jump into the question stem answer choices. Spend some time trying to build this muscle of being able to think about the logical gaps, the issues with the plan. We are all naturally very good at finding faults, I think. So, once you put in a bit of untimed practice to it, this should happen somewhat naturally. But there will be cases where nothing clicks, in which case, go to the question stem. Why did I ask you to try and figure out logic gaps? It helps. It can help, right? Now, question stem, please read carefully. Sometimes the test maker puts some twists here. And I do have a question that's going to help you see that in crystal clear detail. Let's see if any of you fall for it. Okay. But point is, pay careful attention to the question stem. You don't want to misread anything. You don't want to go wrong as far as what is it you need to strengthen or weaken. You need to be very, very careful. Okay. Now, I'm putting the word optional here. Some people prefer to go directly to the choices. That also works. I'm not saying it won't work, but sometimes it's useful to spend a few seconds thinking, doing some kind of an analysis. It's called critical reasoning. You're meant to do a critical analysis of the arguments. You could think of the question, okay, I understand what the argument is, I understand what the plan is. how can I, what can I do? What statement would make me believe more in this plan? What statement would make me doubt this plan? What statement would make me believe more in that conclusion? So on and so forth. Even a broad structure, you don't have to get very specific, but even a broad structure would do. Think about that previous example that we discussed, where, any statement that suggests that there is some other alternate reason for the observed increase in sales. Now, I didn't go into the specifics of what that reason was. I leave that to the answer choices. But at least I have this idea that, hey, a statement which brings in an alternate reason, it should be a weakener, right? Even that is a good step if you can do that. Then go to the choices. Remember, choices are considered as true. You're trying to gauge the impact it has on your argument or plan. Does it strengthen? Does it weaken? Is it irrelevant? Whatever. Now, we will get into this in detail, but remember your answer choices in strengthen and weaken. There is a little bit of nuance. A lot of time, we make the mistake of just looking at it at the surface level without going deeper into what the author is trying to say, what the test maker is trying to convey through the choice. So there is something called implied ideas here. There is a layer of what the author is really trying to tell you here, and I'm going to show that through examples. And then to figure out how it impacts the argument, what we started the discussion with: reasonable common sense logic. If Prince did unethical sales, it's kind of reasonable to say that he doesn't deserve it, for example. Or if he was the only person in this entire sales team to crack, consistently hit the targets, it's kind of reasonable to say he deserves a hike, right? Things like that. Reasonable commonsensical logic, right? Here is one of the most important ideas for you as far as this particular question type, these two question types are concerned. Whenever you are going through the answer choice analysis, somewhere in your mind or on your paper, you should have that vision of what is it you're trying to strengthen or weaken. It is that important. A lot of times, between the two, let's say two tough choices, you might reject the easy ones, but between the two tough choices, you will have to go back and really see how it impacts this exact point, this exact idea or conclusion or plan that you're trying to strengthen. Exactly how does this choice impact? So to do that, you really need this framed in your mind while you're doing it. So keep that in mind. That's 90% of where we all make mistakes is when we fail to do this, right? Kader, I just meant some choices will strengthen, some choices will weaken, some choices are irrelevant, and sometimes you see unclear, ambiguous. So don't worry about any of these short forms. You don't have to classify anything. I'm just putting what those are. Okay. Now another aspect, and I know I'm putting a little bit of theory here. Another aspect is here. These are two question types where you absolutely cannot afford to make a decision just by looking at a few words of the choice. Read the entire choice properly. Take a second just to ensure that you have understood what the choice is trying to say. And I use the word what the choice is trying to say. So what the choice says, what the choice is trying to say, then you do the analysis. So there are some nuances here which you otherwise may not catch. All right. Now let's kind of focus on this argument. I'm sure all of you remember it, and I hope you haven't forgotten it already. What is the idea? What is that central idea that we are being asked to weaken? So the conclusion here, which we are trying to weaken, is, hey, the company, we as in the company will reduce air pollution more by buying old cars than by redesigning the plants. Right? Everybody clear with the argument? I hope the argument was clear. What's happening here? So, what does a company spokesperson say? Hey, instead of redesigning our plants, let's focus. Let's focus on environmental protection campaign. Let's just buy and dispose old cars. So we recently launched that, right? The idea is these used cars, not used, these old cars account for they account for 30% of the pollution. If I talk about local air pollution, these old cars account for 30% of it, whereas the actual industrial plant or plants rather, they account for only 4%. So clearly more impact here. That's the basis for the author, the company spokesperson, who is the author here, to conclude that the company will reduce air pollution more by buying and disposing old cars than by redesigning the plant. Okay, I hope the argument itself is clear. Now, all of you who chose choice A, you got it wrong. Choice C is right. So, I think 40% of us chose choice A and around 48% of us chose choice C, if I had to put a rough number. But why is that? Here's what you didn't understand. And again, you have to read the choice very carefully. Only 1% of the automobiles driven in the local area predate 1980. For example, let's say there are 100 million automobiles driven in the local area that predate 1980. Choice A says there is only 1 million which actually predate 1980. So out of the rather, let me be more precise. There are 100 million cars in total that are driven in the local area. How many of them predate 1980? Only 1 million, right? 1%. Here is a point. Even if this feels like a small number, it's only 1% of cars. It's only 1 million cars which predate 1980. The author has already established that the cars which predate 1980, which in this case is 1 million cars, it accounts for 30%, right? Even if that number is small, they account for 30% of the pollution. So if I buy and dispose these old cars, get these cars off the road, my plan still works, right? Everything will still happen. I'm still going to reduce more air pollution that way. All of you who chose choice A, can you just confirm for me if the logic is clear? I say this is absolutely irrelevant. And the reason for that is, even if this feels like 1% of automobiles, that's a very small number, maybe only 1 million out of 100 million. The point is that 1 million still contributes to 30% of air pollution. So by getting that 1% off the road, everything that the company spokesperson hopes to achieve is still being achieved. How is this weakening? Right? So think about why you are not, for those of you who didn't catch choice A, what was missing? I would wager that you read the choice, but you didn't go into the depth of processing the choice. I have given you one way to deal with choices which seem tough. Sometimes you can take examples. Human beings understand complex ideas through examples. Once in a while, if you can do it fast, you might just benefit by taking a quick example. Right? Just saying. That's why choice A is wrong. The other, I believe everybody was able to reject choice B reasonably well. You can see this argument has nothing to do with cost. Does it cost 3 million? It doesn't matter. The argument is not about whether this solution makes sense given the cost. Nobody cares about the cost. The argument is about whether air pollution will be reduced more by the old cars, getting rid of the old cars, or by redesigning the plants. Argument is about that. Cost is irrelevant. So A, we have rejected. It's kind of irrelevant. B is completely off. Now comes the somewhat indirect but very, very correct choice C. Why does choice C work? And some of you are able to get it. 48%. Actually, it's 48% here and 40% here. More people chose choice A than choice C. So clearly, at least in this batch, this was not an easy question, right? But let's understand why choice C is right. Because the company pays only scrap metal prices for used cars, almost none of the cars which are sold to the company still run. You know what that means? The company is paying peanuts for these cars, and therefore most of the cars which come to the company, those cars are not running. People are only selling those cars which is lying in their parking zones without going hitting the road. In other words, the cars that are being bought and eventually disposed by this factory, this plant, this company, rather, those cars are not contributing to the pollution problem. Because what does the statement say? None of the cars sold to the company still run. So only cars that are pretty much the only cars that are being sold to the company, which the company is buying and then disposing, those cars are anyway not on the road causing pollution. Then that actually weakens the plan, right? because the author says by this plan we are going to reduce more air pollution. But if the only cars you're attracting are cars that are not causing any pollution in the first hand, how is that going to happen? So everybody can see why choice C makes sense. And notice there are layers to this choice. You had to go deep. Make sense? Just give me a quick yes if this idea is clear. Meanwhile, some of you chose choice D. Uh, if you're falling for something like choice D, think about really what choice D is about. In this case, it really is an irrelevant entity. Automobiles made after 1980 account for over 30%. Great. But this plan is not about those automobiles made after 1980. This plan is about those this plan which you're talking about, the company planning to buy and dispose. None of those cars are made after 1980. So that way, this is completely irrelevant. Now, choice E is also irrelevant. All it tells you is, okay, there might be some happy people. This suggests that the car buying campaign, some public support is there. People are, uh, filing less complaints about pollution. So clearly, some people are happy about it. It tells you nothing about air pollution or air pollution reduction in any case, right? So E, I think, is easy to reject. Most of you are stuck between A and C. I hope I've given you clarity, right? Now, I'm taking this as an example for us to understand what this choice analysis really requires in these questions. Notice how we processed choice C, which is the correct answer. We need to see what the choice suggests, not just what it explicitly states, what the choice is trying to tell you, and then analyze its impact on the plan or argument using reasonable, commonsensical logic. So, implied ideas, common sense reasoning, everything is part of this. In other words, when we are analyzing these choices, it is very, very important for us to not make surface level decisions. Surface level different, you just read the choice and instantly say this is not right. Take a second, be sure. Here I'm showing you the actual layers to analyzing this choice. This was the choice as given to you, and we can probably understand the explicit meaning, right? The company pays only scrap metal prices, therefore none of the cars which are sold to the company still run. They don't run at all. They're not on the road actually doing anything. But what the author is actually trying to tell you is this: because the company pays very, very, very less for the cars, those cars that are bought by the company and disposed of, they're not contributing to the air pollution problem at all. So the 30% of air pollution which comes from pre 1980 cars, it's not the cars that are reaching this company. That's the implied idea there. And once you understand the implied idea, then comes the analysis. In this scenario, the company buying and disposing these cars, which are not even contributing to the pollution, makes no sense. Straight away, it's a weakener. So, do you guys see the levels of answer choice analysis? Explicitly, what's given, you should understand. Implicitly, what the choice might be trying to tell you, you should understand. Then comes the analysis. This is what makes the tougher strengthen and weaken questions complex. It's not always this, it's not always easy, right? So I hope this helped. I hope you got something useful out of this. And of course, I think you also see this lesson here. Correct choices in this question type often look very indirect. Sometimes it will look like there's no way in hell this is the correct answer. But you have to be careful. You have to use process of elimination. You have to work through, without being very shallow with your reasoning, you have to work through things. You will see why something works. Okay. I hope this helped. Just to summarize, in terms of question pattern, this is a very common pattern. I'm not a fan of overlooking, going too hard into patterns, because when you are too obsessed over looking at patterns, you kind of fall into all kinds of traps, because the test maker knows to break patterns. But just for familiarity, we solved a question that can fit into this plan goal framework. There is a plan, there is a goal that's stated, and usually one of the ways to, whenever I think of a particular type of question, I try to think about what would be the logical issue of that question. How can I weaken that question? How can I weaken that particular thing? Because then you can also identify strengtheners. So for example, if how do I weaken the plan? If I'm going to say that my conclusion is that the plan will achieve that particular goal, how would I weaken that idea? For example, I can show that by design, this plan is never going to achieve the goal. or maybe the plan is well designed, but in execution, there's no way it's going to achieve the goal, and so on and so forth. Don't obsess too much about patterns. I'm just putting it here for your familiarity. I also want to discuss causality as a key type. That's the only reason we're discussing this. But come back to the key ideas here. Guys, any comments, any general feedback? Do you guys see what's happening? Before I go to the next question. Meanwhile, let me see. Okay, A would not be a strengthener. A is not a strengthener, man. I don't think A is a strengthener also. It's actually irrelevant. Only 1% of the automobiles driven predate 1980. Yeah, I wouldn't. Maybe it's a strengthener, but yeah, I wouldn't go that far. At least I can very confidently say it's not a weakener. Fair enough. What else? Any other? I misread E. Sorry. Okay, you misread. By the way, that's also a common trap choice. Sometimes in a strengthened question, we accidentally choose a weakened answer. That's one of the common trap choices. So, quick show of hands, guys. Can I move on? Can I bring in the next question? From this point on, all our learnings are question based. No more theory. All right. Thank you for that. Let's march on. I hope you guys are enjoying the session also. Let's get right into it. Here is a strengthened question. Let me know what your answer is. Any more answers? I can see 3 answers here. Now the floodgates have opened. I guess all of you are waiting to solve this. Oh, it's an avalanche of A's. Not bad. Oh, just give me 1 sec, guys. So let me just put my laptop for charging. Yeah, that should help. Yeah, happy to see so many A's. A is the right answer. It's not as easy as it looks. Even the previous question, it's 655 to 705. Early 700 level, as some of you like to call it. This one is also at that level, but a lot more of you have got this one right. So the last one had some trickiness to it. This one perhaps was a little bit more straightforward, right? Deva, I do see the question there, but let me know if this is still a doubt once I've shared the PDF. Right now, in the interest of time, I'll just move on. Okay. But if it's still a doubt, let me know. Reach out to me. I'll help you out. Okay. Let's get into this question. Again, firstly, let me ask one question. I'm actually surprised none of you have chosen the trap choice here. Choice C is like the infamous trap choice here, which a lot of people would fall for. I'm happy to see, at least in this group, that's not happening. Okay. Now tell me one thing. What is the main conclusion of this argument? There is an argument here. What is the main conclusion? Others are easy to find the gap. Yeah. Proposal to remove the firebox. Yes. This is actually the main conclusion of the argument. Uh, I don't know how many of you jumped into the answer choice analysis here trying to strengthen this conclusion. If you had read the question stem carefully, you would realize that while the main conclusion is this statement, that's not what you're asked to strengthen. You need to strengthen the claim that the proposal, what is the proposal? Removing the fire alarm boxes, if it is carried out. So given that it's carried out, it will have the announced effect. Announced effect is, in other words, removing the boxes will reduce the number of prank calls without hampering ability to report a fire. So, is there anyone here who went in with the wrong analysis and then corrected? It looks like a couple of you are talking about that. Rereading the conclusion helped, perhaps that's you. Because if you try to strengthen the main conclusion of this argument rather than what is asked, your choice C might look like a legit candidate. But the minute you focus on what really you are asked to strengthen, C can be eliminated. I hope you guys, any of you who kind of got confused with choice C, that might be the reason. But bottom line, here there is a different main conclusion. Fire alarm boxes should be removed is the main conclusion. But what you're asked to strengthen is that this proposal, which is removing the boxes, will have, if carried out, will have the announced effect, which is it will reduce the number of prank calls. So two things have to be achieved. It should reduce the number of prank calls, and it should also not hamper people's ability to report a fire. Right? If this is very clear, let's focus on the answer choices. We can go directly to this. For any of you who did not pick choice A, couple of you there, I suppose. Why does choice A work? It tells you the fire department traces all alarm calls made from private telephones, which is kind of part of the plan here, and it records where they came from. You know what it does? We're talking about private telephones. Everyone has access, anyone can report easily. So we don't have to worry about this hampering people's ability to report a fire. No concerns there. But more importantly, currently, if you observe, the majority of false fire alarms are prank calls made anonymously. The fact that you have all these anonymous calls contributing to the majority of prank calls, false alarms, is important. So what happens when you start tracing the calls? You have cut short, you have kind of taken out the anonymity from it, right? So call tracing removes anonymity. Therefore, the logical expectation, the reasonable, commonsensical, logical thing to say is you would expect a reduction in prank calls. Why? Earlier, the problem, majority of calls were anonymous. That was a problem. You're cutting the anonymity, you expect a reduction in prank calls. That's why choice A makes sense. Therefore, it kind of strengthens this conclusion. It should reduce the number of prank calls without hampering people's ability to report a fire. I hope this is clear. I will specifically focus on any other choice that was chosen. Now, choice C, if you have the right conclusion, right idea of what to strengthen in mind, it's actually easy to reject. The easiest way to reject choice C is it tells you absolutely zero about reducing prank calls. Why should anything choice C tells you, right? I can provide more information about the nature and size. Great. How does that reduce prank calls? Nothing about it. Also, there is a small aspect which is you have to be very, very literal with the conclusion. You have to be very precise. Don't distort the meaning. When it says report a fire, all it means is there's a fire. Yeah, I'm just reporting it. There is a fire. All these other things, nature of the fire, size of the fire, etc., are extra details. Just the fact that I can also give these other details does not change my ability to report a fire. So you can say the choice C also does not impact the ability to report a fire because nature and size not needed as long as job is to report a fire. But the main reason is it tells you nothing about prank calls. So it looks like I think one of you chose choice D. So let's quickly look at choice D. Responding to false alarms significantly reduces the fire department's capacity. Take a step, think about this. This is probably why you need a step like this. But it doesn't tell you why you removing the boxes would have the effect of reducing prank calls, right? So again, this might support the idea that yeah, we should do something about it, perhaps we should remove the boxes. It doesn't support it doesn't strengthen what you really need to strengthen. It doesn't tell you anything about how prank calls will come down. Does that make sense? Shall we move on to more interesting questions? It looks like you guys did pretty well here. I'm happy to see that. Plan will decrease prank calls. All right. Good. So, a couple of lessons here. First, read the question stem carefully because just because there's an argument with a main conclusion given to you, it doesn't automatically mean that that main conclusion is what you're trying to strengthen. Read the question stem carefully. Don't fall for these traps. These are low hanging fruits. If you can cut these errors, you'll straight away see a lot of improvement. Now, the second thing is do be granular with the conclusion, especially. I mean, granular, I mean really focus on those words, what those words mean, what those words don't mean. Because if I talk about ability to report a fire is just my ability to inform the fire department that there's a fire. I don't need to be telling them about nature and size. That doesn't have anything to do with my ability to report a fire. So even such micro specifics in the conclusion, very important. Read the conclusion very carefully, right? For those of you who were struggling with choice C, I don't think any of you were. Very easy to reject once you realize that it's talking about public telephones. In this case, genuinely out of scope. There's nothing to do with this argument has nothing to do with public telephones. Here is the next question. And here again, you're going to see some variations with regard to the nature of the answer choices. Let's have some fun. So few C's, few confused between A's and C's. So we're going to discuss that as well. Okay. What else? Let's take another 20 odd seconds and then let's get cracking. Awesome. So we have a very clear verdict. Again, this, if you go and check the stats, it falls into that early 700 category. And it's fun. It's a fun question. So a lot of C's, maybe an A here and there. Confused between A and C. That's okay. So let's kind of discuss this. Now, let's talk about firstly what is the conclusion here as far as this argument is concerned. I think in this case, it's very easy to figure out what the conclusion is, no doubts about it. The author claims that the fish pass is defective, right? This particular fish pass, it's defective. And what is the basis? How does the author arrive at this claim? Very simple, right? So, before this fish pass was constructed, several thousand fish used to swim upstream. But now, post the construction of the fish pass, only 300 are doing this upstream journey. So, and think about it, a fish pass is meant to let fish pass through. That's the purpose. As the name suggests, it's the pass for fish. So, something that's expected and supposed to be for allowing fish to pass through, while earlier there were several thousand that were passing through, now it's only 300. So, clearly, from this, the author goes on to conclude that, hey, this fish pass is defective. So argument, I'm sure, is very, very clear. Now, let's talk about how to think through this. So this is one of those questions where if you really take a second, you can immediately spot what the logic issue is, right? What if some other reason, some other alternate reason was actually the reason why you saw this drastic reduction from several thousand to 300? For example, let's say earlier before the fish pass, you had 8,000 fish swimming upstream. Now you have only 300 post the arrival of the fish pass. The author believes this reduction is because of the fish pass, but what if there's some other alternate reason? Right? So we did discuss exactly this type. So I'm hoping that some of you could think of the correct answer, which is choice C, even before coming to the choices. You don't have to get the exact idea here, but this idea that you need an alternate cause, right? So now let's talk about why is A wrong. So I hope you guys can see it now, right? A is out of scope, it is irrelevant. I don't care what terms you use. Oh, by the way, when you're seeing, I'm going to share the PDF eventually. When you see these terms, whatever I'm using, you don't have to, when you're solving, you don't have to categorize as irrelevant. If you're able to eliminate or select, that's more than enough. This is just for my understanding, which I'm communicating to you through text. Okay. But you got the frame. Excellent, John. That's because that's the kind of thinking you want. Now look at choice A. You know what A is telling me? Fish that have migrated upstream, they do not come back downstream. They do not return down that path. They might be coming back in through some other route. But fish that have migrated upstream through this river, they do not come back down the same river. You know why it's irrelevant? Firstly, think about what this choice is telling you. It has nothing to do with the fish pass. This is telling you what's the general behavior of the fish. With or without the fish pass, before and after the fish pass, fish that go up don't come down the same path. So tell me, what does this choice have to do with the fish pass? Right, irrespective of whether the fish pass exists or not, fish that have migrated upstream, they do not come back downstream the same river. It tells you nothing about tells you nothing about the fish pass. Is it defective? Is it not defective? How do you know? It's telling you about the post movement behavior of the fish. They do not come back. So for those of you who are confused between A and C, have I completely helped you cut out C? I mean, cut out A. Now I want to discuss the answer choices here because I want to see if you guys are able to figure out some choices here might be strengtheners. That's the point of doing this question. If I look at choice B, again on other rivers of the region, so presumably other similar, it's the same river, same region, so you expect a similar river ecosystem. In other words, apple to apple comparison. In other words, 615 score being compared to 625 score, that kind of stuff. So in other similar systems, the construction of dams with fish passes, it led to only small decreases. Now really imagine the scenario. The purpose of the fish pass is to let fish go through. In other places where they constructed this fish pass, not a big reduction, very tiny reduction. If 8,000 fishes are used to go, 7,990 fishes are going now. No big reduction, very small decreases. But specifically this fish pass, something is happening. This fish pass is meant to allow fish to go through. Specifically here, it's not happening. What does it make you believe? It actually makes me believe that really this fish pass is defective. In other words, choice B, you are looking for a weakener. Choice B is a strengthener. Are you guys seeing this? So the question you should ask yourself is, how many of you were able to think of choice B as a strengthener? Even if you got C right. Because if this was a strengthened question, a choice like B would actually be a good candidate. You're dealing with a weakened question here, so you reject this choice. I hope this is clear. Choice C, it's a unanimous choice here, and it's absolutely right. You guys can see how it brings in an alternate reason. So maybe it's not the fish pass. It introduces this possibility that perhaps it's that potentially toxic river sediments. It might have killed the fish. It might have prevented the fish from moving upstream because this thing is coming downstream, right? It's presenting an alternate reason for why we see this reduction, drastic reduction in number, which has nothing to do with the fish pass. Yeah. Jaiwal, happy to see that. Harsha, great question. But this is exactly what I'm talking about. Again, put yourself in that round table. Imagine if somebody mentioned choice C to you. It should make you doubt, right? So the author tells you the fish pass is defective because 8,000 became 300. The number of fish migrating upstream has drastically come down post the fish pass. Now, if somebody came in and told you, hey boss, actually, that the construction of this dam, it has stirred up some somewhat toxic things which we're carrying downstream. Your fish has to go upstream, but I'm telling you that this is toxic stuff that's flowing downstream. Does it not create an element of doubt? Proper, reasonable doubt that perhaps it's actually you will never know for sure if it's actually the toxic river sediments. But for you sitting here and listening to choice D after listening to the argument, sitting in that boardroom, you should get an element of doubt, right? Harsha, I hope that helps. You are my namesake. I hope this helps. Right? So choice C is actually right. And this is the correct meter for weekend. You will see choices like this only. These are all official questions. Right? I'm trying to set that meter. This is the correct meter. It creates a doubt. You are sitting in that room, somebody is mentioning choice C, it should create that doubt. Tangibly, it should make you doubt. It's not confirming for you. Remember, a weakener does not have to disprove. So your very logical question, maybe the fishes are resistant. Maybe they're resistant. But for you hearing choice C, the doubt has come in. That doubt is there. That's sufficient. Right? This one is OG. The previous one was LSAT. The previous one was not the previous one. The first one we did was LSAT. This one was LSAT. These other ones we have done as actually official, OG. Right? So that's kind of why C is wrong. I didn't see any other choices, so I'll kind of skip choice D. But again, I want you to pay attention to choice E. Remember, I already explained the concept. Remember, I told you a strengthener which defends against a weakener, or rather, a statement that defends against a weakener is also a strengthener. That's actually what choice C does. So for those of you who confidently got choice C, I also hope you were able to arrive at choice C. Else, there is still something to learn from this question. Your official questions are gold mines in terms of learning. You really should spend time, learn a lot. So what does choice C says? During spawning season, how is that relevant? All this upstream migration is during spawning season. It's not irrelevant, it's very relevant. During spawning season, the dam releases sufficient water for the migratory fish to swim upstream. What happens if this is not true? So, if this is not true, the dam is not releasing sufficient water for the fish to swim. In that case, can you blame the fish pass? Perhaps not. It may not be the fish pass is defective. There's not enough water for the fish to swim up, right? Therefore, by guarding against this potential weakener, choice C is also a strengthener. You could put it in as a premise. So these are some things that you should understand, right? It's one of those cases where figuring out the logic gap is pretty easy, and therefore a lot of you are instantly able to see choice C, right? So let me also take this opportunity to talk a little bit about what is one of the more very common and important patterns, causalities. Even what we discussed, the conclusion may not be a causality, but a causal relationship is part of the reasoning, right? So whenever you see a causality, say X causes Y, how can you attack this causality? And if you know how to attack it, you know how to strengthen it. The reverse of attacking it is strengthening it. So I'm just discussing how do you attack or weaken a causality. If you're given X causes Y, maybe I can prove or I have a statement which suggests that it's not X that causes Y, it's Y which causes X. And everything that I've written here, you'll find in actual official questions, right? Joan, see ya. You can catch the rest of the session tomorrow, I suppose. Next, maybe it's not X that causes Y. Maybe there is some other factor Z that's actually causing X and Y, which is why you see X and Y together. There's no causal relationship between X and Y. It just so happens that there is a common factor called Z which causes both X and Y. That's another way to weaken the idea that X causes Y. Or other words, the more simple ones, just something which actually says that X could not have caused Y, something which says that it's not X which caused Y, maybe it's some alternate cause Z which caused Y. This is the one which we have been operating on for a while now, right? But all of this and perhaps more are ways of attacking or weakening a causality. I'm just putting this into your mind space. I'm also very clear on one point. Don't rely entirely on patterns. Patterns help you. So when you're doing your review, you should recognize this because your brain understands that you can move a little faster with some of this. But always keep your mind free from bias. Don't rely on this because the question maker knows to put traps around this. You have to be very careful, right? So yeah, I hope this discussion helped you a little bit. Here we go. One more question. All of this is causal flaw. Everything I just discussed, Rohan. I'm showing you all the flaws in the causal arguments, causal reasoning. At least some of it. When you have issues focusing on the heart of the argument, how should you address it? Okay. You probably need to slow down first when you're reading the argument. If you're struggling to find the conclusion or the heart of the argument, that means that you need a little bit of untimed practice. Untimed because all this ability gets built untimed more than timed, where you read, you take your time to identify, then you see the actual answer, you take that feedback, you will start improving. But my previous session, my last week's session on boldface, actually focused a little bit on trying to identify the main conclusion slash heart of the passage. So you might find something there. Right, guys, just solve this question. All right, let's take a few more seconds. It's mostly one answer, which happy to see that. At least there's consistency here. Nice. So let's move. Again, excellent job, guys. All of this classifies at least in the moderately hard category, 655705. Uh, so B is the right answer, but let's understand why. And E actually, E is a very good discussion point. If you chose E, I'm happy we'll get to discuss that because there's something really going on with E, right? So again, I think the argument itself is very clear. 12 years ago and also 5 years ago, there were extended periods when the currency went weak. Its value was unusually low compared to the world's most stable currencies. So both these times something happened. The weak currency kind of made the product manufactured products of this country a bargain on the world markets, and it ended up increasing the exports considerably, substantially. Based on this one fact that two times in the past when the currency became weak we saw great exports. Based on this, some politicians are now trying to say, let's do that one more time. Let's allow the currency to go weak. Let's allow the currency to go weak, and therefore we should expect to see a considerable increase in export, right? And what do we need to do? We need to weaken the idea that the recommendation, if followed, notice this point, I want you to pay a lot of attention to these words. It's not, we don't really care whether it's followed. Point is, if it is followed, this recommendation, this particular plan, let's call it politician's recommendation, if it is followed, it's going to achieve its aim. That is, it is going to increase exponent, it's going to increase your exports considerably. I hope the argument itself is very clear, right? And one of the things, and here also it kind of brings in, it's very easy to intuitively think about the logical gap here, right? What's really happening? Two times before the currency went weak, my exports increased. Politician says, let's allow that to happen again. Let the currency go weak, exports will increase automatically. When will it not happen this time? What can kind of play spoil sport here? What if the scenario is different now compared to those last two times? So 12 years ago and 5 years ago something has changed. Earlier that might have been true. When you allow the currency to go weak, things happen, export increase. But maybe the situation is different now. The situation could be financial, geopolitical, I don't know, but something is different, right? At a very broad level, that's an idea that can work. And now you see, most of us were stuck. Most of us chose B. There was an E, so we'll discuss that as well. Uh, I chose B because D and E talk about others, where C is like irrelevant. Okay. So let's quickly run through these choices. So which of the following, if true, right? Let's look at choice A. Several of the politicians now recommending have made the same recommendation. If anything, this makes me believe more. Choice A tells me these politicians have been right before. Even that time they made the same recommendation and they were proven right. If anything, this makes me believe more. It can never be a weakener. Straight reject. Option B is actually the right answer, and it's a little subtle, right? There is an element of subtlety here. It brings in, and again, you could question whether any of this really happens, but if you are that person listening to this, it brings in a very interesting possibility which will make you doubt the argument itself. It brings in that this possibility that, hey, last two times whenever that currency weakened, my manufacturing sector was operating well below its peak capacity. So peak capacity, let's say it's 100, we were operating at 50. So when, and let's say the demand at that time was 40, demand was being met comfortably. But now when the currency weakened 12 years ago and 5 years ago, thanks to currency weakening, 40 became 80, that's the overall demand. Because you're operating well below your peak capacity, you are able to comfortably provide the goods. You're able to comfortably meet that demand. What choice B is saying that's not the case this time? What is what is a scenario where right now you're already operating at peak levels? It's introducing this possibility that unlike the last two times, unlike 12 years ago and 5 years ago, now thanks to currency being weakened, if the demand goes up, if that export demand goes up, the country may not, the manufacturing sector, it's already operating at peak levels, it may not be able to meet the demand. That is the logic of choice B. I'm happy to see that most of you got this. I'm explaining it in different words, I suppose, but the idea is the same. I hope you guys got it. Let's look at choice D, because I think that was also discussed, right? Those countries whose manufactured products compete all have stable currencies. Again, if anything, this tells me that hey, the other currencies are stable. The other currencies are stable. My currency is going down, so I do expect that again my product will be a bargain on the world market. And if anything, it adds to the argument, right? If anything, it helps you build the case that at least export demand will be there. Maybe therefore, as a result, you'll see export increase considerably. So choice D, if anything, has a slightly strengthening impact. I hope you see that. I don't think it's irrelevant. It's somewhat slightly a strengthener. Choice E is a very interesting trap. Remember, what we need to weaken is this idea that, hey, there is this plan. Let's call the plan P1. What is P1? Allow the currency to weaken, right? What we need to weaken is this idea that plan 1, if it is followed, will achieve its aim. It will achieve its aim, which is increase in export. What choice C says is there is some other plan which can also achieve the aim. There's some other plan P2 which might also be able to achieve the aim. Isn't it irrelevant here? Because I don't care that there are other ways of achieving the same objective. The question is asking me, weaken the idea that if implemented, this plan will achieve the objective. So if implemented, if followed, it doesn't matter that there could be this plan, there could be another plan. All of them are irrelevant, because what I need to weaken is the idea that forget all these other plans. Let's say we are implementing this plan. I have to prove this plan doesn't work. So Muskan and I think somebody who looked back also, right? So some doubts about E. I hope it is cleared. Muskan, I think you got the right answer. My apologies for that. E gives a suggestion that does not weaken. I hope it is clear. And it's a very subtle thing, right? It looks like it's an alternate. Like I said, the author is playing with you. The testmaker is playing with you. It looks like, oh, this is an alternate cause. This is an alternate idea. Here it doesn't work. The plan, if followed, will achieve its aim. That's what I need to weaken. So we don't care if there is some other plan. There could be 10,000 other plans. It doesn't tell you anything about whether this plan, if it is implemented, if it is followed, will work or will not work. We have no clue. So it's actually irrelevant. So I hope you guys are seeing the subtleties here. We can skip this question in the interest of time. Homework. I have a couple of other questions also. Let's do one more question. Let's do one more question. But meanwhile, let me address the doubt here. I don't really understand that question, if it has and if it doesn't. What's the difference? Big difference, right? So it really depends on what the wording is. If I, for example, give you a scenario where the conclusion is, in order to achieve this particular objective or aim, I need to do plan A. If that is the conclusion I have to weaken, then choice E will actually be a right answer. If my conclusion is that I absolutely need to execute plan A, there is no other way, plan A must be done to achieve this objective, then the very existence of another plan, like what choice E is bringing to the table, that's a weakener. Here, just the fact that plan A can achieve this objective. If I know that some other thing can also achieve the objective, it doesn't change things. End of the day, plan A, as you forget about other plans, what this if followed does is it tells you that other plans don't matter. There could be a plan 2 or a plan 3, doesn't matter. Our conclusion, which we are trying to weaken, is, and that's what that if followed does. It kind of tells you that this is the only plan here. This is the plan that we are following. This plan, if you follow it, it's gonna weaken. It's gonna achieve the aim. We need to weaken that idea. I hope it's somewhat clear. Can you explain C, especially only if and how to work with these? What is C? Ah, only if those are very tricky. Those are sometimes tricky. There's no denying that. Here, let's look at what the choice is trying to say. The economy of a country experiencing a rise in exports, which is the objective here, it will become healthier only if the country's currency is strong or the rise in exports is significant. So it's actually telling me about something that's very downstream of the plan, right? If I think about what choice is telling me, right? It's telling me the economy of a country, it will experience, which either it experiences a rise in exports, therefore it becomes healthy. Either if the point is, actually let me make this. I think I misread it the first time. Wait a second. Yeah. So let me come back to this. My apologies. I lost track for a second. So yeah, let's look at choice C. The economy of a country experiencing a rise in exports will become healthier only if the country's currency is strong or the rise in exports is significant. So firstly, it's talking about the economy which is experiencing a rise in exports. Firstly, this is your first red flag. Do I know if this rise in export is happening in the case of this particular country? Therefore, we're trying to weaken the idea that that will happen, right? The conclusion is that this particular plan, which is let's weaken the currency, it is going to increase my exports. We are trying to weaken this. Firstly, I don't even know if this experiencing a rise in export, this rise in export is going to happen or not. I'm already not clear about that. That's the first point. Second point, what choice C says is if there is an economy which is experiencing a rise in export, it can become healthy only in two scenarios. Either the currency is strong or the rise in export is significant. In our case, currency is allowed to be weakened. This is not going to happen. This might happen. Even if this happens, all you know is economy is strong. But that has nothing to do with your argument, right? So think about it. Your argument is about what? Look at the conclusion that you're trying to weaken, right? By allowing my currency to weaken, will it lead to an increase in exports? That's what your argument is about. Currency weakening, export. Where does economy come into the picture? It's telling you what's downstream. Now, if you get a rise in export, then even if your currency is not strong, you might still enjoy a healthier economy. That's what choice C is trying to say. Essentially, if I had to summarize what choice C says is, it suggests that as far as this country is concerned, hey, even if because of the currency weakening, the exports rise considerably, we might have the downstream impact of economy still being healthy. The question you ask is, why does that matter? It has nothing to do with whether this export will increase altogether, right? We don't know if this export increase is going to happen. So I hope this idea is coming through. That only if here says, when you ask the question, what does only if mean? Only if means this is the only condition. I can do this thing only if so and so things happen. So only if means the only condition where something happens, no other condition. Is that clear? Good question. So I might have over explained that a little bit. If there's still a doubt, reach out to me. Happy to help. But yeah, let's go to the next question. I was able to get B and E. How do I think about it? So, Khader, that's a design feature of the exam. You will eventually, in most cases, be able to eliminate three choices, come to the remaining two. What do you do then? Right? Let me give you one perspective. When you're stuck between two choices, what are the things that you can do? Number one, firstly, read the choices again. Maybe you misinterpreted something. This is my first filter. Maybe it's just that I misread the choices somewhere and I misunderstood the meaning. Maybe this is not the problem. What's the next place which I would check? I'm talking about when you're stuck between two choices. Right? I think this is a useful discussion for some of you, quite a few of you. So when you're stuck between two choices, one of the things you can do, reread the choice. It's possible that you misinterpreted something. Maybe that's not the issue. Go back to your conclusion. If it's a conclusion based question, like what we see with strengthen and weaken, go back to the conclusion, or in other words, whatever you're trying to strengthen or weaken. Right? Maybe there's a small misinterpretation there. For example, in this case, we don't care that there are other plans, whether this particular plan, if it is followed, will it lead to the stated objective, right? Maybe that impact of if it is followed kind of got missed. If you crack it here, then you'll be able to eliminate something. For instance, with for choice C, for me, I think it helped to eliminate choice C. If this also doesn't click, that means your problem is somewhere else. Maybe there is some tiny detail somewhere in the argument that you missed. Now, for example, in the Springfield question, if any of you missed choice A, some of you who went wrong did not find choice A, maybe that word anonymous in the passage, your brain read through it without processing it. Now, when you go back, if you catch anonymous, you'll still get it right. Right? So, reread the choice, reread the conclusion. If both don't work, if you still have the time on in the test mode, go back. There's something you missed in the argument, right? This is how I approach it when if I'm stuck between two choices. Usually, somewhere here you will crack it, right? Then, of course, tactical decision in the interest of time as well. So I hope this worked. But yeah, Soumya, that is my point. It is a downstream consideration which is completely irrelevant. That's how I rejected it, honestly. But because you asked me about only if and economy, I got into the crux of it, I think. But bottom line, uh, argument is about whether or not weakening the currency this time will lead to a considerable increase in export. Choice C is telling me what happens after. If by any freak accident this plan actually works and you have an increase in export, then your economy could still be healthy on account of considerable export. That's what choice C says, but who cares? And your question about only if simply means this is the only condition, no other condition, right? I hope all of that helped. Lengthy detour. Let's do one more question if you guys are okay. But tell me, guys, if you are you guys okay with doing one more question, or are you fried for the day? I could make you do one more. Yeah. All right. Question on your screen. Let's have some fun. It's a great question. It's one of my favorite questions. Let's learn from this. Yeah, so I see answers coming in. Hmm. So I'm a little surprised. It's a little bit more between D and E. No candidates for B. I'm surprised that to see that. B is also a somewhat popular choice. So, hmm. Okay. Okay. Somebody who thought of B as well. All right. All right. So let's discuss this. This is a slightly tougher question. Uh, and yeah, it's a fantastic question. It requires actual visualization of the scenario. Your brain should form the picture of what you're reading. Uh, Quite a few D's and quite a few E's from what I see. So it's mostly between that. Let's talk about each of these choices. But first, let's understand the argument. Sometimes the best way to understand an argument is to picturize what's happening. Let your right brain do some things. Don't just read English, form a picture. So, guillemots are birds of Arctic regions. Okay, they feed on fish that gather beneath thin sheets of floating ice. Okay, I understand that, and they rest on nearby land. So, thin sheets of floating ice, I can imagine they're Arctic. Firstly, you imagine the Arctic. So, where is the Arctic? It's in the north, not Antarctic, which is in the south. Arctic is in the north, right? North of the planet. They feed on fish that gather. So, it's fish. So, they feed on fish that is kind of gathering beneath the ice, beneath thin sheets of floating ice, and they rest on nearby land. Okay, I am imagining in my head. So this is the coast, this is the water, this is where sheets of ice are formed. The fish exist here. These birds live here and feed on this fish. All of that is being understood. Now, see, these birds need 80 consecutive snow free days. Why is this relevant? You're talking about the north, extreme cold in those regions. Guillemots need 80 consecutive snow free days in a year to raise their chicks. So, from a reproduction and raising their chicks standpoint, that snow free day is important. So, until average temperatures in the Arctic began to rise recently. So, in recent times, perhaps global warming, average temperatures have started rising. So, until this started rising, the Guillemot's range was limited to the southernmost Arctic coast. At this point, the brain is kind of forming this picture that this bird's range was somewhere in this zone, stuck in this region, southernmost Arctic coast. So they live on this coastal region. They live somewhere here. They feed on fish that is trapped in the ice around this region, right? I hope as you were reading, you guys were also able to form these kinds of pictures, right? So until recently, until the average temperatures in the Arctic began to rise recently, the range of this bird was limited to the southernmost Arctic. It kind of makes sense when you think of it geographically, right? This is the geographic north and this is the south. Yeah, as you go north, it gets colder. So it's in the south that you'll still have some level of warmth. So it makes sense that till global warming, not you wouldn't say global warming, till the heating started, till average temperature started to rise, these birds kind of stayed at the southern regions where you expect logically that it'll be warmer. Not general common sense. Now, therefore, if the warming continues, so if this trend of warming continues, the Guillemot's range will probably be enlarged by being extended northward along the coast. So, the argument is telling us if the warming continues, so consider the scenario where the warming is going to continue, you're being told that the range will be enlarged along the coast. What does that mean? Maybe this direction, maybe this direction, maybe both directions, I don't know. But if this is the current range, the range is going to increase, let's say to something like this. Everybody has a clear understanding of the argument at this point. Everybody agrees with me. So far, so good. Range will enlarge, and not just enlarge in one way, it's going to enlarge along the coast. So this movement is going to happen this way. It could enlarge in one direction, maybe this, yeah, whichever way. Everybody clear? Got it. Now let's look at the choices, right? Why it was between B, I mean, some only one candidate for B, but B is like the trap choice. A lot of people do choose B. uh, D is actually the correct choice. But first, let's quickly look at any of the choices that we want to discuss. Now, A is very easy to reject. Even if the warming trend continues, there will still be years where these chicks are killed where unusually early slow. This should be easy to reject, right? Think about it. This is not even telling you about the coast or inward. This warming trend will continue, but this early snow could happen anywhere, irrespective of where it could happen. It's an unusual event. Your bird is not going to plan with this idea that, oh, this unusual event is going to happen. Irrespective of whether an early snow can come or cannot come, the bird is going to move northwards. It doesn't weaken anything here, right? A, I think, is easy to reject. I don't think any of you fell for it. Now, let's look at B, because B was kind of. I'm only discussing B because there is clearly some discussion. Is it a strengthener? Doesn't B also strengthen? Quite a few of you feel that B is a strengthener, right? How does it strengthen? I don't think it's a weakener, but I'm not really sure I will call it a strengthener. What B says is, if this Arctic warming continues, you're expecting that the bird will go up north, but the predators are also likely to succeed in extending their own range farther north. So this bird has some predators. There are some creatures which actually feed on these birds. They're a predator and prey, right? So choice B is telling me if this warming continues, it's not just that the bird will expand its range up north, its predator will also expand its range up north. Now, I'm not sure how you guys thought it's a strengthener. I believe it's come somewhat irrelevant. So here is what I think about it. Even right now, where they are at the southernmost tip, this bird has to deal with predators. The bird's decision to move up north, it's not because of the predator, it's because of the temperature aspect. They want those snow free days, temperatures are rising, they want to move up north, right? It has nothing to do with the predator, right? You cannot say that because the predator is moving up north, it's going to prevent this bird from also moving up north. The predator has nothing to do with. A lot of people would choose choice B, saying, "Oh, because the predators are also going up north, this will be a weakener. Then why will the bird go up north if the predator is also going to go north?" The thing is, irrespective of the predator, the bird will still go up north. The bird's decision to go up north has nothing to do with the predator. It has to do with, uh, you know, ensuring some snow-free days for the chicks and all the other things. Yeah. Everybody clear? Let's see some logic here as to how it strengthens. Unless girl moths move up north, predators wouldn't move. Why would we assume that? Unless guillemots move north, why does it? You're assuming that the only prey for this predator is this bird, Harsha. I don't know. My point is, it doesn't weaken the fact that the bird. It doesn't weaken the idea that the bird will move up north, right? And remember, by the way, I mean, the reason D is right is something subtle. It's not just about the bird moving north or not moving north. It's about what happens to the range. So those of you who chose choice D saw this, right? Yeah, my point with choice D is, see, the birds are moving north. It has nothing to do with escaping the predators. Even in their current life, the current situation in the southernmost portion, they are facing the same predators. It is more about ensuring optimum temperature and all that, right? So just the fact that the predators will also move north does nothing to tell you about whether the birds itself will move north and therefore whether the range will increase. Irrespective of the predators, these birds might go north, might expand the range. All of that can still happen. So that's why choice B is actually irrelevant. A lot of people take choice B thinking it's a weakener. So I was really surprised when I saw, some of you saw it as a strengthener. Yeah. Even if one bird succeeds, range increases. Even if predators kill some of them, predators will kill anyway. Uh, but predators going north doesn't tell you anything, right? Just because predators are going north, why wouldn't the birds also go north? And you need to weaken the idea of the range increasing. So how will it weaken? If you're thinking it's a strengthener, okay. Came to D by POI, was low on confidence. We'll come to that. C, I think, is easy to reject. Let's focus on this beautiful choice called D. If the warming continues, much of the thin ice will disappear. Akhilesh is spot on with that idea. The most important thing to understand is the thin sheet of floating ice. So, what's happening with D? This is the current situation. This is the current range, let's say. What I've highlighted is here is the current scenario. So, the current, let's say this range is like 10. Just 10, right? You could put 10 or 100, I don't care, right? Range is 100. If the arctic warming continues, much of the thin ice will disappear. Now you can't just reject it just by reading this. You have to think about what is the impact that this has on the scenario here. If much of the thin ice here disappears, so basically the world is heating up, that region is also heating up. So the south was in general the hotter region. As you go north, it gets colder. So here, with the arctic warming continuing, the thin ice here, it's going to disappear. You know what happens when the thin ice disappears here? The food source, the fish that these birds feed on, that's not there anymore, right? Because what do they eat? They feed on the fish that gather beneath thin sheets of floating ice. So now choice D is bringing in this scenario that, hey, the birds might be moving north. Great. You might think that it's going to expand the range. You might think that because of northward migration, the range which used to look like this would now look like this. So 100 has become 300. This is what you would think. But what might happen is, because the thin ice, a lot of the thin ice in the southern regions is gonna disappear. The fish in the south won't be there. The fish that are beneath the floating ice, not there anymore. What this is trying to imply is that the fish might not stay in the south. So your range might become like this. The birds have completely migrated north without staying in the south. They have completely discarded this zone because they don't have any food here, right? There's no food. There's no trapped ice. There's no floating ice. There's no fish that is beneath the floating ice. There's no food for the birds here. So while they have moved north along the coast, the range may not increase. The range may not get enlarged because of this loss, right? And that's the point. It is the range. Conclusion, clarity, what exactly you're trying to strengthen or weaken. That's the point. Now, choice E was surprisingly chosen a lot. I believe, and some of you are right, it's actually a strengthener. I saw that comment, right? Isn't E a strengthener? Yeah, it is a strengthener. The fish that these birds eat are currently preyed on by a wider variety of predators in the southernmost Arctic regions than are farther up north. This is, this essentially gives the bird enough motivation to keep going north. Lesser competition for food. So, if anything, this would strengthen rather than weaken. Right? So, I hope this helps. Um, but what was the key to solving a question like this? Firstly, there are cases where you absolutely have to picturize it, use common sense. Arctic is north, as you know, the south will, you expect the south to be, the southern portion of the Arctic to be a little warmer. All that common sense is also useful. But beyond that, really tougher questions where possible in movie format, try to picturize, because once you start doing that, you'll start really understanding what's happening. Number one. Number two, again, if there's anything that this question proves for you, please pay very granular attention to what is it you're trying to strengthen, weaken, what exactly is that conclusion or plan or whatever it is, right? It's about the range. It's not about whether the birds will go north or not. It's about whether the range will enlarge or not, right? And if that is clear, you can see why a choice D makes sense. And also, don't reject a choice like D. Just suddenly is talking about thin ice. How does a thin ice fit into this argument? What does it do? You need to get into that layer, right? If the thin ice is going to disappear, what is the impact of that? Think about that. So I hope that helped. All right. It's the range. Came to D by POE. In the exam, sometimes, not sometimes, you should always rely on POE. 4 wrong answers, always better than one answer which you think is right but you're not sure. If you can eliminate 4, that is a safe, proper way to do verbal. You won't say this in quant, but verbal relies on process of elimination. Right? So I just want to summarize some of the things that we learned. Hopefully you've learned. Strengthener is a new idea that makes us believe a little more. Weakener casts doubt. The useful framing I really want you to remember, because when that going gets tough, like when you start overthinking, when you start thinking, hey, but what if that what if that conclusion still holds true because of this? You have to remember an example like this boardroom. If somebody given the argument and given somebody making this point, what impact does it have on you sitting here? Does this make you be given the information without assuming anything you can't assume? Is this logical? Does it logically make you believe more? Does it logically make you believe less? That framing is important. Uh, a strengthener is technically a premise. One of the most important aspects is this one: the way you analyze these choices. Typically, these statements are given considered as true. You will see the phrasing "if true" in the question step typically, right? And then if it's true, you need to think about how does it impact the argument. Now, remember these aspects. I showed you an example where there is an explicit meaning which the choice is telling you, whatever the choice tells you actually, but you had to go down to the next level, which is the implied or suggested meaning, and then you have to analyze. So often with these question types, that what you're seeing, right? The choice D is talking about thin ice. What is thin ice? What is it trying to say? We went into that. Then, given that, what's the analysis? I think you're also seeing what's a really standard feature of the tougher questions. The correct choices sometimes will look very indirect. You wouldn't face an issue like this with, let's say, the fish pass question, where it's very intuitive what the right answer might be. But in a question like this, some of us did struggle. Often these correct choices are also very, very indirect. So what that means is no shallow processing. Read, understand explicitly, and what the test maker is trying to say through that choice. You have to be careful. That's the key to this question type. right? You know, that's about it. I put a couple of homework questions, but anything else? Any general ideas? I hope this helped. I really just eliminated D before, and because yeah, so that's where when you read thin ice, you have to go a little deeper into what is it trying to say. So how do you build that? If that's the question, how do we build that? A little bit of untimed work. Untimed work is where you build a lot of these muscles, right? So to do the choice analysis well for these questions, you have to spend time untimed. Solve questions of easy level if you're struggling. Otherwise, start with medium and start and or go with hard. But solve untimed. And when you're solving untimed, for every set of questions that you solve, spend time reviewing the questions. And when you review, it's not just whether you understood the argument, how you got the right answer, how you went wrong. Every choice you need to first rethink what your logic was. You need to reflect on how you arrived at the correct or incorrect answer. You need to specifically, uh, given this untimed format, you need to specifically think now about how you would select or reject a choice. Then you should compare with good solutions. GMAT Club, most official questions, you will get good solutions, right? And then you check. And once you check those solutions, you'll see if logically you missed out on something. Your brain develops two things. It develops the depth that is needed for some of these trickier answer choices. So your brain gets used to thinking beyond the surface level. You read a choice, but what is the choice trying to say? Your brain will start cracking that implication layer. What is the author implying layer? That's the first improvement that you would see. I'm talking about anyone who's struggling with this, right? Not all of you. The second thing you'd see is as you do this pretty nice, strong analysis of each and every choice, your POE muscles also develop well. You see what works, what doesn't work, what would I use to reject a choice, what would I use to not reject a choice. You get a sense of the correct meter, what works, what doesn't work, right? And in strength and weaken in general, specifically in these two question types, there is a meter, right? What works, what doesn't work. When can I say, okay, this is unreasonable, this is very logical, common sense thinking, right? It comes with a bit of untimed practice if you are not already there yet. If you're already there yet, just keep practicing, you're sorted, right? uh, what else? Please, more similar questions. Yeah, today we are done because I don't want to torture any of you beyond the point. But next is evaluate, right? Evaluate is coming up soon. I wanted to do strength and weekend first, though there's a lot of demand for evaluate, because when you do evaluate, at some level, everything that you've seen here, the impact analysis. So you look at the choice and you see what impact it has on the argument, right? It's the same muscle that evaluate also requires. In fact, to a higher degree, because you might do it two times for the choices, for every choice, right? So we have built the base for evaluate here. Next is evaluate, right? Uh, any other general questions? Next session, yeah, I think we have to fix the date for it. The PDF for this one also I'll share. And any of the questions I didn't try, you know, I have written down my thoughts about why something is right or not right. Also, otherwise, feel free to reach out to me. Anything you feel that I've under explained or maybe I was not clear in the way I explained, uh, just reach out to me. I can help, right? Sometimes at 11:15, your brain does things you're not always as sharp, but any doubts I can handle, don't worry about it. uh, right, what else? I hope the session in general helped. Any other general points, please let me know. How do I get this correct confidence while solving the exam? Because I tend to counter. Okay. Pratyaksh, see, D is giving some other. I don't think this is even a cause effect argument. Yeah, think about that. Uh, for D, we have to imagine, and do we have any other way to confirm a reasoning? Because through language, can you exemplify in same question? This everything I explained is the reasoning. Now, whether you put it in a visual like I've done or language is the same. Even if I go by language, what is being said is much of the thin ice will disappear. If much of the thin ice in the south disappears, now I'm explaining in terms of language without looking at the visual. If much of the thin ice in the south disappears, that means the food source may not be there anymore. The food source, the fish which gathered beneath the sheets of thin ice, those fish won't gather, which means what will this bird eat? It might push the bird to get out from the south, which might which might lead to the situation where even though the bird is moving north, the range will not increase. Now, this would be the pure verbal way of explaining this, right? I just tried to put it in a visual because visually, people say, right, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So when you can imagine something visually, you understand it better. But that's the words. What else? Yeah, I hope that helped. I have three questions. Can we treat causal flaw questions along the same lines as beginner? Those are related. Flaw. I mean, I hope to do flaw also eventually. Flaw is somewhat related. Just that flaw, when you're pulling out a weakener is a flaw. So there is that relationship, close tight relationship between flaw and weaken. Sometimes it's practically same to same. There are some variations of flaw question where you get questions which are not which are more structural. So it will be a little like main point. The author's flaw is assuming something that could not be assumed. Now, I haven't gone into the specifics of the argument, but this could be the answer choice for a flaw question. Or the author has attacked the instead of attacking the argument, the author has attacked the person making the argument. Now, that would also be a specific type of flaw in the argument. So sometimes with flaw, you have those more structural answer choices, which is not specific to the question. It's written in a generic way. It's your job to tie it specifically to the question. So those kinds of flaw questions might feel a little different from weekend, but otherwise, they're like cousin, brother, and sister. It's not too much of a difference. Good question. What else? Okay. Is OG enough for a practice? Now, depends on who you are. That's actually an excellent question. Is OG enough for your practice? Depends on who you are at this point. What do I mean by that? If you're somebody who is already pretty good, for example, if your target score is 705, I'm just giving an example. If your target score is, let's say, 705, and you're already sitting pretty at 685, your current level is 680. You have been taking a lot of this. That doesn't mean you're more or less intelligent. It just means that you've taken a lot of these standardized tests. You have a feel for it. Then, very honestly, you probably don't need tutoring or a course. Just go and do the OG. As you do it, you get used to the patterns of the test, the meter of the test. You should, crack your score. If you're really far away from your target score, you might need additional questions, and that way a course or a third-party resource can help. Because OG questions are very precious. A lot of time, people come up to people like me with this idea that I've finished all the OG, where do I go next for questions? It's a very common complaint, right? So it's good to, if you have a long distance to go, it's good to conserve your OG a little bit. But if you're close to your target score, just stick to official. Official is always the best. There's nobody else. And I'm saying that I used to create questions, and I still create questions once in a while. I take a lot of pride in my questions, but I still can't say that my questions are better than the OG questions, or even on par. There is a difference there. Yeah. How many 655 questions can we get if you're doing well on the test? Honestly, at least me personally, I don't have a good answer to this question. A lot of the algo is a bit of a black box. Maybe someone else has a more concrete answer. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't be able to give you a answer which I truly believe to be true, right? We all have some ideas on that, but I'd rather not, confuse you accidentally there. Yeah, how do I get this correct confidence? The confidence comes from the solving that you do before, the practice that you do before. So if you see that, firstly, if you can always test where you are. Let's say whether it's easy questions or medium questions or hard questions of CR, you can immediately test where you are and see where you stand. If you're struggling with CR EC, forget everything else, focus on building all your fundamentals of CR. Confidence comes from being able to get good accuracy in good time. I'm not talking about your final mocks or sectional mocks, small time sets. If you're doing 10, 20, 30 CR questions and getting good accuracy across difficulty levels, That's where my confidence comes from. That's where confidence comes from. The final part of confidence is you get a couple of good mock scores, you'll be confident. But a lot of confidence comes from building what I like to call solving ability. So your preparation is not just you mugging up concepts. Once you have learned the concepts, at each difficulty level, you have to focus on building your solving ability. What does that mean? Under the test constraints, under the test time constraints, if you solve 20 or 30 questions of CR, you're able to get for easy, let's say 90-95% accuracy. For hard, let's say 70% accuracy. When you're here, the confidence is automatic because you've already proven yourself. Things like mocks are just downstream. I hope that helped. Uh, Thanks for the feedback, yeah, all of you. Faith, Soumya. If you feel that there's some question which perhaps I under explained or I maybe confused you accidentally, please just reach out to me. I can help you out with that. Okay. Let's move. Let's move. What else? How to work on building vocab for boldface. Firstly, check out my boldface session if you didn't attend. It's not too much about vocab. Remember, the GMAT is not out there trying to get you on vocab. They're not typically trying to mess you up with vocab tricks. So, as far as boldface terminology is concerned, I have a simple principle: apply common sense to the best possible ability. To give you an example, the first time I saw the word consideration in the boldface context, I'm like, okay, what is a consideration? Perhaps, and thinking very, you know, in a very simple way, it's something that what is a consideration that I'm having? I'm considering something in order to do something. So it's a consideration is something that's being considered for a certain reason. Even that kind of simplistic understanding usually does the trick. You don't have to go around by hearting all kinds of terms. As you practice, you see a term, you understand with the context of it. That's sufficient. Don't overdo this, right? But great question. I understand where that is coming from, right? What else? What else? What else? Yeah. Other fixed set of logic is exam as well that we practice in OG. Uh, you know, of course, I'm sure with the GMAT keeps coming up with new logic patterns. We see that with quant and of course with uh, CR and RC as well. Especially with CR, there's always new patterns, but it's not about patterns. It's about building ability. Whatever patterns comes on your screen, to a certain level, you should be able to solve. That's what we're gunning for. But is there a fixed set of logic? Perhaps not. It keeps evolving, right? How to work? Yeah, I think I've addressed that. Is GMAT Club? I personally am a big fan of GMAT Club's quant. I use it extensively, and I recommend it to my students as well. Uh, Verbal, personally, not much of a fan. I think DI is okay though. I haven't solved too much of the DI side yet, barring the data sufficiency. But yeah, but big fan of their quant. So I use those questions myself. I tried solving those all the time. Right? Any other questions or are we done? I hope you guys had a good time. I hope I've given you a good feel for strengthen and weaken. Um, Remember, if there's one thing you take away, I mean, a couple of things I'm sure you take away, but do be very careful with the answer choice analysis. Spend some, especially if you're not getting all these questions right, you're struggling somewhere with these two question types. Solve a bit of untimed. Don't rush through the choices. Really try to build that muscle of reading a choice, trying to figure out what it's trying to suggest, what it's trying to say, what it's suggesting, what it's implying, and then that analysis. Be a little granular with that in the untimed phase because that muscle builds. Likewise, POE muscle also builds as you do a bit of this, right? And this is if you're struggling. If you're not struggling, fantastic. Probably this session was more revision for you. If you're struggling, do a bit of that. You will feel better. And I hope the general concepts, everything you need to know, I think I've given you here. All right. Good. Thank you. Average time taken is 3 to 4 minutes. Uh, One of the things I would recommend is you try to audit your time. Guru Prasad, good question. You try to audit your time. You try to see why you're taking time, rather not why, where you're taking time. So if you're taking too much time in reading the argument, then you have to think about what you can do to fix that. Now, for example, maybe you are meandering too much. Maybe you're taking too much time going through the sentences. You're not able to quickly arrive at the main conclusion. Then you might want to do a few exercises where your focus is just on quickly arriving at the main conclusion and the support justification for the main conclusion. Argument based questions, for example. If you're struggling with answer choices, taking a long time with answer choices, then you might want to see why that is it because you end up having to reread again and again? If you're rereading again and again, then how you read the first time, a slow, steady, proper understanding the first time is better than having to reread again and again. So things like that. You identify first which area in general is absolutely messing up your time. If there are multiple areas, prioritize. First do the upstream. First fix the upstream, which is the argument. But otherwise, identify which area, and then you kind of try to ideate on what you can do. Some people, they're taking time because they're putting too much pen to paper. Some people take too much time because where they personally might benefit from putting pen to paper, they're not putting pen to paper, right? So the answers here in terms of what can fix that can vary from person to person. But the first thing would be to figure out where the issue is. I hope that helped, right? All right, guys. I think I gave you a good picture. Let me know, please put a like if you enjoyed the session, and even otherwise, reach out to me if there's any doubts, any further questions. I'm happy to help. See ya. Have a great time. Let me, get rid of the sharing and let's come back. Have a great time. I look forward to seeing you guys soon in my next session. I don't know when that is. We'll fix the time for it. The PDF of the session, it should be there. I will share it with the good folks at GMAT Club. It should be out there tomorrow, day after sometime. It should be there in the YouTube description. Um, Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in my next session, whenever that is. It's most probably evaluate. All right. Bye.